You wake to a world gone wrong. The light filtering through your window isn't the warm yellow of morning, but a sickly brown, as if the sun itself has grown ill overnight. You don't know it yet, but this is day 1 of 31, the first day of a month without power, without clarity, without the mercy of clean air. This is the beginning of your time in the Dust Bowl, during what will become known as the long blackout, though you don't have a name for it yet. You just have the faint hope that it will pass by evening. It won't. The wind started sometime during the night, a low persistent moan that worked its way into your dreams, turning them anxious and unfocused. Now awake, you register that it hasn't stopped. It pushes against the walls of your modest home, testing the seams and joints, searching for weakness. The sound isn't the howl of a storm. That would suggest something that passes. This is different. This is a presence that has come to stay. You rise slowly from bed, your movements deliberate. There's an unfamiliar weight to the air, like it's been thickened overnight. The floorboards creak beneath your feet, protesting as you make your way to the window. Drawing back the curtain, you're confronted with a landscape transformed. The familiar shapes of neighboring homes, the trees that line the street, they're all there, but muted, as if viewed through gauze soaked in sepia. It's the dust, not the dust of neglected shelves or forgotten corners, but something elemental, primordial. The earth itself has taken to the sky, suspended in the air you breathe, coating the world in a fine layer of soil that belongs in fields, not floating free around your home. The drought has been going on for years now. The land, overtaxed and abandoned, has finally surrendered its grip on itself. You move to the kitchen, a strange automaticity guiding your actions. The electric light switches click uselessly under your fingers. The power is out. This isn't entirely unusual. Rural electrification is still patchy at best, but something tells you this outage won't be brief. You fill a pot with water from the tap, noticing how it runs brown for several seconds before clearing. You place the pot on the stove, reaching for matches to light the gas burner. The flame catches, a small comfort in the dimming world. As the water heats, you approach your radio, the RCA Victor that sits on your kitchen counter, a portal to the world beyond your walls. You turn the dial, anticipating the reassuring voice of a news broadcaster, perhaps explaining what's happening, how long it might last. But there's only static, a harsh, crackling emptiness. The stations are gone, or the signal can't penetrate whatever is happening outside. You pour the hot water over coffee grounds, watching them bloom and sink. The surface of the liquid shimmers with something that doesn't belong there, a fine dusting of soil that somehow made its way into your sealed canister. You drink anyway, the grit between your teeth already becoming familiar, a texture you'll come to know intimately in the days ahead. At the window again, cup in hand, you study the street. There's movement, your neighbors also rising to this strange new reality. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down is sweeping her porch, a futile gesture against the onslaught of dust. Mr. Robbins struggles to start his truck, the engine coughing and sputtering before falling silent. The children who usually play in the vacant lot at the end of the street are nowhere to be seen, kept indoors by parents who sense the danger in the air. The wind picks up, and with it comes a sound like sand being thrown against glass. You watch as a tumbleweed rolls down the center of the street, unnaturally fast, as if fleeing. Then another follows, and another, a procession of dead vegetation escaping what you cannot. By mid-morning, you've draped damp towels along the bottoms of doors and windows, an improvised seal against the invading dust. It helps, but not much. The particles are microscopic, finding their way through infinitesimal gaps in the construction of your home. You notice it first on the windowsills, a thin line of brown like someone has drawn it with their finger. By noon, it's on every horizontal surface, the kitchen table, the bookshelf, the arm of your chair. You try to clean, but it's an endless task, wiping one surface only to find another. Covered moments later, the cloth you use grows heavy with soil, and when you rinse it in the sink, the water turns to mud. You give up after an hour, resigning yourself to the presence of the earth inside your home. The light outside never improves. If anything, it dims further as the day progresses, as if time itself is running backwards toward night. But this isn't the comforting darkness of evening. It's something else, a brown-black veil drawn across the sky. You light candles, their flames steady, yet somehow diminished in the thick air. They cast long shadows that make your familiar space feel foreign, uninviting. Hunger eventually drives you to the pantry. The shelves hold the usual staples: flour, sugar, canned goods, dried beans. You select a can of beans, the label faded from years of sitting in wait for just such a need. The can opener moves smoothly around the metal rim, and you empty the contents into a pot, adding water that already looks diluted with soil. As you eat, sitting alone at your kitchen table, you listen. The wind continues its constant pressure against the house, but there are other sounds now: the creak and sigh of the structure around you, the occasional cough from a neighboring home, carrying through walls suddenly permeable to sound, the soft pat-pat of dust landing on surfaces. You should feel alarmed by these sounds, but instead they form a new normal, a baseline of existence in this altered world. Nightfall brings no relief, no lifting of the dust. If anything, the darkness makes it more oppressive, the particles catching the light of your candles, turning the air into a visible medium, thick with floating earth. You prepare for bed, even though it's early, not quite 7 by your watch. There's nothing else to do in the dark, no radio to listen to, no electricity to power the small luxuries that fill evening hours. Your sheets feel rough with dust, despite your efforts to keep the bedroom clean. As you lie down, you notice the grit between your teeth, in the corners of your eyes, under your nails. You've been breathing it all day, and now your lungs protest, a dry cough that will become as familiar as your own heartbeat in the days to come. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by the constant sound of the wind and the occasional harder gust that seems to shake the foundations of your home. You dream of clear skies and clean air, of electric lights that respond to switches, of radios that connect you to the world beyond your walls. You wake several times, disoriented, in the perfect darkness, reaching for a glass of water that tastes of earth. Day 2 dawns, indistinguishable from dusk. The light outside is the same sickly brown, the wind the same constant presence. You rise, moving through the same motions as yesterday, checking for power that isn't there, trying the radio that offers only static, noticing how the layer of dust on every surface has thickened overnight. Your food supplies seem adequate for now, but you're already calculating, dividing what you have into daily rations that might stretch through an uncertain future. The water from your tap is running browner today, and you worry about the well that supplies your home. How long before it's compromised by the dust? By noon you hear, knocking at your door, the first human contact since the dust began. It's your neighbor, Mr. Thompson, his face half hidden behind a bandana tied over his nose and mouth. His eyes are red-rimmed and watering. "Thought I'd check in," he says, voice muffled by the cloth. "See if you needed anything." You invite him in. Though you're hesitant to open the door wider than necessary, he steps inside, removing his hat, which releases a small cascade of dust onto your floor. "I'm sorry about that," he says, but makes no move to clean it. What would be the point? You offer him coffee, which he accepts. As you prepare it, he tells you what he knows, which isn't much. The dust storm extends beyond the county, perhaps throughout the state. No one has heard from the cities. No news has made it through. The phones are down. The power is out. Everywhere he knows of. Could be days, he says, sipping the gritty coffee without complaint. Happened before, few years back in Texas. They called it a black blizzard. Lasted 3 days. 3 days seems manageable as you sit there, sharing coffee and concern with a neighbor. 3 days of discomfort, of cleaning dust from surfaces, of eating from cans, and waiting for the sky to clear. Surely you can endure 3 days. Mr. Thompson leaves after finishing his coffee, promising to return if he learns anything new. You watch through the window as he makes his way back to his own home, leaning into the wind, his figure quickly obscured by the brown haze. The afternoon stretches before you, empty of purpose. You try to read, but the dim light strains your eyes, and the pages of your book feel rough with dust. You consider baking bread. The oven doesn't require electricity, but the thought of kneading dough with hands that never feel fully clean gives you pause. Instead, you take inventory of what you have. 6 candles, various sizes, a half-empty bottle of kerosene for the lamp, matches, thankfully a full box, canned goods that might last 2 weeks, if you're careful, flour, sugar, coffee, tea, a row of preserves you put up last summer when the garden managed to produce, despite the drought, jars of tomatoes, green beans, peaches in syrup. You have water, for now, though you've started to collect it in pots and pans, worried that the supply might stop. As evening approaches again, the wind intensifies. It no longer just moans, it screams. The walls of your home shudder under the assault, and you find yourself moving to the center of the room, away from windows that suddenly seem fragile, inadequate barriers against the fury outside. That night, the temperature drops. You pile on blankets, but the cold seeps through, carrying dust with it that settles in your bedding, your hair, your lungs. Your cough is worse now, coming in fits that leave you breathless and tasting blood. Day 3 begins with a realization that this will not end soon. The sky outside your window is darker than before, the air inside your home thicker with suspended soil. Your eyes burn constantly now, your throat raw from coughing and from the fine particles that scrape it with every breath. You try the radio again, turning the dial slowly through frequencies that yield only static. Then briefly, a voice breaks through, distant, fragmented, but human. Emergency, stay indoors, conserve water, duration unknown, and then it's gone, swallowed by the static that has become the soundtrack to your isolation. You ration your candles now, lighting only one in the evening hours. The darkness becomes another presence in your home, filling corners, erasing the boundaries between objects. You move carefully, hands outstretched, navigating by memory and touch. The 4th day brings a new sound, a scratching at your roof like hundreds of tiny claws. Later, you'll learn it was the sound of topsoil from hundreds of miles away, carried by winds that reached impossible speeds high above your home, now landing, reclaiming space in a world gone wrong. You develop routines to pass the time: morning coffee, gritty but hot, dusting surfaces that will be covered again within hours, rationing food, eating small meals that leave you hungry but extend your supplies, listening to the radio at specific times, hoping for that fragmented voice to return with news, with hope. It doesn't. By the end of the first week, your world has contracted to the few rooms of your home. You no longer look outside, unable to bear the unchanging brown twilight. The dust has worked its way into everything. Your clothes feel heavy with it. Your food tastes of it. Your bed offers no escape from it. You cough constantly now, a deep, racking sound that echoes in your empty home. Sometimes you cough until you retch, bringing up phlegm darkened with soil. You try not to think about what this means for your lungs, for your future. The wind never ceases, never offers a moment of silence. It becomes white noise, a constant presence that you stop consciously hearing, but that affects everything: your mood, your sleep, your sense of time passing. Days blend into one another, marked only by the gradual depletion of your supplies, the thickening layer of dust on surfaces, the worsening of your cough. And what you think is the 8th day, though time has become slippery, unreliable, there's another knock at your door. It's not Mr. Thompson this time, but his wife, her face also covered, her eyes also red and watering. "John's sick," she says, not entering when you open the door. "Bad cough, bringing up dirt. Doctor can't get through from town." You offer what you have: canned soup, a clean handkerchief, sympathy that feels inadequate against the magnitude of what's happening. She takes the soup with murmured thanks, but her eyes hold a question you can't answer. How long will this continue? That night you dream of drowning, but not in water, in soil. You wake gasping, your lungs fighting against dust that isn't just in your dream, but in your bedroom, in your nose, in your mouth. You drink water that tastes increasingly of earth, wondering if there's any meaningful difference now between what comes from your tap and what falls from the sky. The next morning, the 9th or 10th, you're no longer certain. You notice something new: silence. The wind has stopped, or at least paused, in its relentless assault on your home. You move to the window, hope flaring for the first time in days. Outside, the world is still brown, but differently so. The air isn't thick with swirling dust now. Instead, the dust has settled, covering everything in a uniform layer of fine soil. The street is barely visible, the contours of yards and boundaries erased by this new landscape. It reminds you of snowfall, but wrong: brown instead of white, suffocating instead of insulating. The silence lasts for perhaps an hour. Then the wind returns, not in a sudden gust, but gradually, building once more to its constant moan. The dust rises again from where it settled, returning to the air, and with it goes your momentary hope for an end. You check your supplies again, calculating how much longer you can last. The canned goods are dwindling faster than you'd planned. The water from your tap is now consistently brown, requiring longer to settle before you can drink it, leaving more sediment at the bottom of each glass. That afternoon you hear a vehicle on the street, the first motorized sound since the dust began. You rush to the window to see a government truck making slow progress down the center of the road. It stops at each house, and men in uniforms step out, knocking on doors, speaking briefly to the occupants. When they reach your house, you're already at the door, opening it before they can knock. The man who approaches wears a mask over his nose and mouth, more substantial than the bandanas you and your neighbors have been using. His eyes are protected by goggles, and for a moment, you envy this small shield against the pervasive dust. "Government relief," he says, his voice official, but not unkind. "We're distributing emergency supplies." How many in your household? You tell him you're alone, and he nods, returning to the truck. He comes back with a box containing canned goods, a gallon jug of water, candles, matches, and a pamphlet titled Dust Pneumonia, Symptoms and Home Treatment. This last item he hands to you separately, his eyes meeting yours in a moment of shared understanding. He's seen your cough, recognized it for what it is. Any word on the power? You ask, your voice rough from disuse and dust, or when this might end. He shakes his head. Lines are down for 100 miles in every direction. As for the dust, he looks up at the sky, though there's nothing to see but brown. Nobody knows. Could be days, could be weeks. Best prepare for the long haul. Weeks. The word settles in your stomach, like lead. You've barely managed days, and now you're facing weeks of this half-existence, this slow suffocation. The truck moves on, continuing its grim delivery route. You close your door against the swirling dust and examine your new supplies. The canned goods will extend your rations by perhaps another week. The water is clear, a luxury you'd forgotten existed. The candles are tallow, cheaper than the beeswax you've been burning, but they'll provide light, another week of seeing your dust-covered home instead of sitting in darkness. Night falls, or rather, the brown twilight deepens to a brown darkness. You light one of your new candles, its flame weaker than you'd like, but better than nothing. By its light, you read the pamphlet on dust pneumonia, recognizing too many of your symptoms in its clinical descriptions: dry cough, shortness of breath, fever, chest pain. The recommended treatments are basic: rest, fluids, clean air. You laugh bitterly at this last one, the sound triggering another coughing fit that leaves you doubled over, spots dancing in your vision. Sleep that night is fragmented, interrupted by coughing and by the return of wind strong enough to rattle your windows in their frames. You wake fully before dawn, though dawn has become a meaningless concept. There is only brown darkness and brown light, no true day or night. The layer of dust on your bedside table is thicker than ever, despite your efforts to clean it the evening before. You draw a line through it with your finger, watching as the dust immediately begins to fill in the groove, erasing your small mark on the world. This, you realize, is what you're fighting against. Not just the physical presence of the dust, but its symbolism. It is erasure. It is the earth reclaiming space, covering the works of humans, returning everything to a primal state. Your home, your possessions, your body, all are being slowly buried, integrated back into the soil from which they came. The thought should be terrifying, but instead, it brings a strange calm. There is something almost reverent in this slow apocalypse, this gradual surrender to forces beyond human control. The dust is not malevolent. It simply is. It exists in a time scale that makes your life, even if it extended to 100 years, seem momentary, inconsequential. You rise from bed with this new understanding, moving through your morning routine with deliberate care. You heat water for coffee on the gas stove, strain it through a cloth to remove as much dust as possible, and drink it sitting by the window, watching the brown world outside. The wind continues. The dust continues, but you observe it now with a detached curiosity rather than fear or despair. This calm lasts until midday, when a new sound intrudes, coughing from the house next door. Mr. Thompson's house, not the dry, scratching cough that has become your constant companion, but something deeper, wetter, more urgent. It continues for several minutes, then stops abruptly. The silence that follows is more unsettling than the coughing had been. You should check on them. You know this, but the thought of opening your door of walking through the dust-filled air to their home, of exposing yourself even briefly to the full force of what lies outside. It paralyzes you. You sit at your kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of cooling coffee, listening for any sound from next door. None comes. By evening, guilt overcomes fear. You tie a bandana over your nose and mouth, wrap a scarf around your head to cover your hair, and step outside for the first time in days. The world beyond your door is worse than you imagined. The dust is not just in the air. It has buried the street to a depth of several inches. It covers cars, porches, the few pitiful plants that once grew in yards. The wind whips it into dancing devils that swirl around your legs as you make your way carefully to the Thompsons' door. You knock, waited, knocked again. The door opens slowly, revealing Mrs. Thompson, her face gaunt and grey beneath the ever-present dust. "He's gone," she says simply. "This morning. His lungs just filled up." There are no words adequate to this moment. You stand together in silence, broken only by the wind and by your own betraying cough. "You should come stay with me," you finally offer, though your home is no cleaner, no safer than hers. She shakes her head. "His brother's coming from Oklahoma. If he can get through." She doesn't sound convinced that anyone can get through the dust, that any connection to the outside world remains intact. You leave her with promises to check back tomorrow, to bring food if she needs it. The walk back to your own home seems longer, the dust deeper, the air thicker. Inside, you remove your makeshift dust mask, but it's made little difference. Your mouth tastes of soil, your eyes burn, your lungs protest with each breath. That night, you dream of Mr. Thompson buried not in a coffin, but directly in the dust, his body becoming indistinguishable from the soil that surrounds it. You wake with tears, tracking clean lines down your dust-covered cheeks, the salt moisture, a brief respite from the pervasive dryness. The days continue, one indistinguishable from the next. The dust never stops falling, the wind never ceases its moan, the darkness never fully gives way to light. You mark time by the dwindling of supplies, the thickening of dust layers, the worsening of your cough. 2 weeks have passed, or maybe more. Time has become as murky as the air. You've established a routine of sorts, mornings spent conserving energy, afternoons cleaning what can be cleaned, evenings by candlelight, reading the same few books over and over, finding new meanings in familiar words. The radio yields only static now. No fragmented voices break through. No distant stations penetrate the dust cloud that hangs over your world. Your isolation is complete. Your connection to the broader human experience, severed by soil suspended in air. You check on Mrs. Thompson daily, watching as she fades like a photograph left in sunlight. Her brother-in-law never arrives from Oklahoma. Perhaps he tried and couldn't make it through the dust. Perhaps he too has succumbed to the same dust pneumonia that took her husband. Perhaps there is no longer an Oklahoma to come from. The whole world now buried under the same brown shroud that covers your small corner of it. One evening, it must be near the end of the second week, though you can't be sure. You stand at your kitchen window watching the dust swirl in the dim light of dusk. Your attention is caught by movement on the street, a darker shape moving through the brown haze. As it draws nearer, you recognize the silhouette of a person walking slowly, head bowed against the wind. It takes several minutes for the figure to reach your viewpoint. It's a young man, barely more than a boy, his clothes hanging loose on his thin frame, a bandana covering the lower half of his face. He stops in front of your home, looking up at your window. For a moment you make eye contact through the dust-streaked glass, a connection that feels electric after so much isolation. You open your door before he can knock, gesturing him inside, away from the swirling dust. He enters hesitantly, removing the bandana to reveal a face young but lined with exhaustion and grief. "I'm looking for the Thompson place," he says, his voice hoarse from dust and disuse. "My Uncle John and Aunt Mary." You understand immediately. This is the nephew they were expecting, finally arrived from Oklahoma. The news you must deliver sits heavy in your chest, another layer of weight, adding to the burden of dust in your lungs. "Your uncle passed," you say gently. 2 days ago. Your aunt is next door." He receives this news with a nod, as if he's heard too many similar reports to be shocked by one more death. "The roads are gone," he says, after a moment. "Buried. I walked the last 10 miles. There's nothing left in Oklahoma. The farms, the towns. It's all just dust now." You offer him water, which he accepts gratefully, drinking deeply despite the grit. You don't tell him about his aunt's declining condition, about the cough that has grown wet and desperate, about the fever that flushes her cheeks, even as the rest of her skin takes on an ashen pallor. He'll see for himself soon enough. "Is it like this everywhere?" you ask, gesturing vaguely at the windows, at the dust-filled world beyond. "As far as I've been," he confirms, 5 states, all the same, dust, and wind, and darkness. They say it's the drought, the plowing, the way we treated the land. Now the land is treating us the same way, turning us to dust. There's no bitterness in his voice, just a factual acceptance that makes his words all the more devastating. You've suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed that this is not a local phenomenon, but a regional, perhaps national disaster, solidifies the dread that has been building in your chest. You send him to his aunt with a jar of your precious clear water and a can of soup. Through your window, you watch his figure move next door, disappearing into the brown haze once more. You wonder if you'll see him again, if he'll stay or continue whatever journey he's on, seeking some place where the sky might be visible, where the air might be breathable. That night, the wind rises to a fury you haven't experienced before. It doesn't just moan or scream. It roars, a primal sound that seems to come from the earth itself. The windows of your home rattle in their frames, threatening to break. The roof creaks and groans under the assault. Dust pours in through every crack, every seam, until the air inside is as thick as the air outside. You retreat to the center of your house, away from windows that might shatter, from exterior walls that shudder with each gust. You wrap yourself in blankets, cover your nose and mouth with a damp cloth, and wait, counting heartbeats, counting breaths, counting seconds that stretch into minutes, that stretch into hours. Sometime in the night, you hear a crash from nearby, a tree falling, perhaps, or a structure collapsing under the weight of accumulated dust and the force of the wind. You tense, waiting for your own home to give way, but it holds, a small fortress in a sea of swirling soil. Morning comes, though you only know this because your watch tells you so. The light outside hasn't changed. If anything, it's darker, the dust cloud thickened by the night's storm. You move carefully through your home, assessing damage. A window in the kitchen has cracked, a thin line running diagonally across the glass. Dust has piled in the corners of rooms, against doors, on every surface. Your home is being buried from the inside out. You check the cracked window, pressing cautiously against the glass to see if it will give way. It holds, but you reinforce it anyway, covering it with a piece of cardboard and sealing the edges with tape. It will keep out some of the dust, though not all. Nothing keeps out all the dust. Outside, The world has changed again. The dust has drifted against buildings, covering some doors up to the middle. The street is no longer visible, just a vague depression between mounds of displaced soil. In your yard, a tree that stood for decades has fallen, its roots unable to hold in the dried-out earth, its branches now half buried in dust. You make your way next door to check on Mrs. Thompson and her nephew. The dust is deep, in places reaching your knees, making each step an effort that leaves you breathless and coughing. When you reach their door, you find it already open, the house empty. They're gone, whether by choice or necessity. You can't tell. There are no notes, no signs, just an empty house slowly filling with dust. The third week begins with a new fear, that you might be the only person left, that everyone else has fled or succumbed to the dust that fills every breath. You ration your food more severely now, uncertain when or if more supplies might reach you. The water from your tap has stopped completely, leaving you dependent on what you manage to collect, and on the government-issued gallon that is already half empty. Each day becomes an exercise in conservation of food, of water, of energy, of hope. You move less to breathe less. You eat once daily, small portions that leave you hungry but extend your supplies. You drink just enough to moisten your throat, to thin the mucus in your lungs enough to cough it up. The cough is worse now, a constant companion that wakes you from fitful sleep, that interrupts your thoughts, that leaves you light-headed and weak. You recognize the progression described in the dust pneumonia pamphlet, from dry cough to wet, from clear phlegm to colored, from mild fever to serious. You are moving along this continuum, each day, bringing you closer to the end of the page, to the end of the prognosis. On what you calculate to be the 17th day, you wake to a sound you haven't heard since the dust began, a human voice calling your name. It's distant, muffled, but distinct. You rise quickly, vertigo momentarily darkening your vision, and make your way to the door. Outside, making his way through dust that reaches mid-thigh in places, is the government man who brought supplies 2 weeks ago. He calls your name again, and you answer, your voice weak but audible. He reaches your porch, his face still covered by that enviable mask, his eyes still protected by goggles. Evacuation orders, he says, without preamble. Everyone who can move is being relocated. The dust storms aren't stopping. Governments setting up shelters in the cities where they can filter the air, provide medical care. Hope flares briefly, then dies as you look down at your body, thin and weak from weeks of dust and deprivation. I don't think I can walk out, you admit. The dust is too deep, and my lungs. He nods, understanding. Trucks coming tomorrow. We'll get as close as we can, carry those who can't walk. Be ready at dawn. 1 bag, essentials only. And then he's gone, moving to the next house, calling another name into the swirling brown air. You spend the day in preparation, though there's little to prepare. You gather clothes, though all are dust impregnated, rough against skin made sensitive by weeks of constant irritation. You collect your remaining food and water, knowing that even if rescue comes, supplies will be scarce. You find the few small treasures that matter, photographs now faded under layers of dust, letters tied with ribbon, a watch that belonged to your father. Everything fits in one small bag, your life reduced to what you can carry. The rest will stay, entombed in dust, returning to the earth that seems so determined to reclaim all human endeavor. That night, you don't sleep. Partly it's anticipation of rescue, partly it's the cough that has grown so severe it only allows rest in brief intervals between spasms. Mostly, though, it's the feeling that if you close your eyes, you might not open them again. that the dust might finally win its slow war against your body. Dawn comes, or what passes for dawn in this dust-shrouded world, with no sign of the promised truck. You sit by your window, bag packed, watching the empty street. The wind continues its constant moan, the dust continues its relentless drift, but no vehicle appears to break the brown monotony. Hours pass. The dim light that passes for day reaches its peak and begins to fade again toward dusk. Still no truck, no rescue, no escape from the slow suffocation of your dust-filled home. You try to maintain hope, telling yourself that the dust makes travel difficult, that the truck is coming but delayed, that help is still on its way. But as darkness falls again, a different thought takes hold, that the government man was wrong, or lying, or himself caught in the ever-deepening dust before he could return with the promised salvation. Night comes, the 20th night of darkness and dust. You light your second-to-last candle, watching as the flame struggles in the dust-laden air. Its light catches on particles suspended around you, creating a halo effect that might be beautiful if it weren't a visible reminder of what you're breathing, of what is slowly filling your lungs. You don't unpack your bag. To do so would be to surrender to the idea that rescue isn't coming, that this slow burial in dust is your fate. Instead, you sit beside it, ready, watching the door, listening for the sound of an engine that might signal salvation. It doesn't come. The third week ends, as it began, in dust, in silence, in isolation. Your supplies dwindle to critical levels. The candles are gone, leaving only matches that you strike sparingly to navigate in the deepest dark. The water is rationed to sips that barely moisten your cracked lips. The food is counting down to empty cans and bare shelves. Your cough has become your primary companion, a presence more constant than the wind outside. It racks your body, leaving you breathless and tasting blood. Your breathing between coughs is labored, each inhalation a concentrated effort that yields too little oxygen for the work it requires. The evacuation that never happened becomes a bitter memory, a cruel hope that serves only to highlight the reality of your abandonment. You are alone with the dust, and the dust is winning. The second week stretches into the third week, without electricity, without relief, without any sign that the world beyond your dust-filled home still exists. The wind continues its mournful howl, a sound so constant that you no longer consciously register it. The dust continues its relentless invasion, finding every crack, every seam, every pore in the structure of your home and in the fabric of your body. Your lungs ache with each breath, the fine particles scraping delicate tissue never meant to process soil instead of air. You've established a routine of sorts, though routine suggests normalcy, and there is nothing normal about your existence now. You wake, if you've managed to sleep at all, to the same brown twilight that passes for day. You check your dwindling supplies, rationing with increasing severity as the days pass without resupply or rescue. You clean what surfaces you can reach with the least expenditure of precious energy. Though it's a Sisyphean task, the dust returns as quickly as you remove it, an unending cycle of futile effort. Food has become both necessity and enemy. You need it to sustain your weakening body, but everything tastes of dust. The canned goods that form the bulk of your diet, beans, corn, condensed soup, all carry the same gritty texture, the same earthen flavor. You've taken to straining everything through a cloth, attempting to remove at least some of the particulate, but it's an imperfect solution. The dust is too fine, too pervasive, too much a part of your world now to be fully separated from anything. Water is your most precious resource. Your tap has been dry for days, the well either empty or clogged with silt. You rely on what you managed to collect in the early days, and on the meager government ration that arrived 2 weeks ago. Each morning, you pour a small amount into a cup, using it to moisten your lips, to rinse your mouth of the ever-present grit, to thin the mucus in your lungs enough to cough it up. You allow yourself one true drink per day, savoring the wetness as it travels down your dust-coated throat. Your eyes burn constantly. Irises and lids are braided by fine particles that float in the air and lodge beneath your eyelids. You've learned to blink deliberately, slowly, to minimize the scratching sensation. When the burning becomes unbearable, you use a few precious drops of water to rinse them, the temporary relief worth the expenditure of your dwindling supply. The cloth you wrap around your mouth and nose, a bandana at first, now layers of sheets torn into strips, as the bandana became too dust-laden to be effective, offers minimal protection. It filters the largest particles perhaps, but the fine dust passes through the weave, as if it weren't there at all. Still, the psychological comfort of the barrier, however ineffective, makes it worth the effort of maintaining. Time has become elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that make the counting of days inexact. You mark time instead by the gradual emptying of shelves, by the thickening of dust layers, by the progression of symptoms in your failing body. The once sharp boundaries between day and night, between hours and minutes, have dissolved into a continuous brown twilight, broken only by periods of brown darkness. You move through your home like a ghost, touching surfaces with fingertips that can no longer feel fine texture, only registering the roughness of accumulated dust. The floors, once polished wood, are now covered in a layer that prints with your footsteps, recording your movements like snow but offering none of snow's clean beauty. The furniture, chairs, tables, shelves, all wear the same brown shroud, their original colors and materials obscured beneath uniformity of dust. On what you think is the 25th day, though it could be the 24th or the 26th, your tracking having grown imprecise, you wake to a sensation of weight on your chest. Not the figurative weight of despair or abandonment, though those are present too, but a physical pressure, as if someone has placed a sandbag across your torso. Your cough, which has been your constant companion, seems different, deeper, wetter, more productive, but also more painful. You know what this means. The dust pneumonia has progressed. The soil you've been breathing for weeks has built up in your lungs to a level that is no longer merely irritating but actively dangerous. Your body is fighting, trying to expel the foreign matter, but the battle is uneven. For each particle you cough up, you breathe in 3 more. It is a war of attrition, and the dust has endless reinforcements. Rising from bed takes effort that leaves you dizzy and breathless. You sit on the edge of the mattress, waiting for the room to stop spinning, for your lungs to catch up with your body's oxygen demands. When you finally stand, it's with the careful movements of the elderly or infirm, though you are neither or weren't before the dust came. At the window, peering through glass, now so covered in dust, it's nearly opaque, you see a world transformed yet again. The dust has drifted against buildings, covering some doors entirely, creating new topographies where once were yards and streets. The landscape is alien, unrecognizable, a desert where a neighborhood once stood. You turn away from the window, from the evidence of the world's erasure, and make your way to the kitchen. Your supplies, meticulously rationed and carefully counted, are approaching critical levels. The water, your most precious resource, has dwindled to less than a quart. The food, canned goods, dried beans, rice, might last another week if stretched, but the effort of preparation already taxes your strength. As you stand contemplating your dwindling resources, a coughing fit overtakes you. It's violent, doubling you over with its force. You press a cloth to your mouth, feeling it grow wet with what you bring up. When the spasm passes, you examine the cloth, expecting to see the usual brown-flecked phlegm. What you find instead turns your blood cold, bright red blood, unmistakable against the dust-grayed fabric. You've read the dust pneumonia pamphlet enough times to have memorized its progression of symptoms. Coughing blood is near the end of the list, followed by a blank space that implies what goes unwritten: death. Your body is losing the war against the dust. The realization should be terrifying, but instead it brings a strange calm. There is a certainty in knowing, in recognizing the trajectory of your situation, the ambiguity of hoping for rescue, for rain, for an end to the dust. That was its own kind of torture. Now, understanding that your time is measured not in months or years but in days or perhaps weeks, you feel an unexpected clarity. You make a cup of tea, using a precious portion of your water, allowing yourself this small luxury in light of your new understanding. The tea tastes of dust, as everything does, but beneath that earthy overlay is the faint memory of what tea should taste like: warm, slightly bitter, comforting. You drink it slowly, savoring not just the liquid, but the ritual of its preparation and consumption, a small vestige of normalcy in a world gone profoundly wrong. Sitting at your kitchen table, cup cradled between hands that have grown thin and fragile over weeks of deprivation, you consider what to do with the time you have left. There is no one to contact. The phones have been dead since the beginning, and even if they weren't, who would you call? Your family is distant, scattered across states that may be as dust-covered as your own. Your neighbors have fled or succumbed. You are alone in a house, slowly filling with the soil you once walked upon. You decide to write, not letters that will never be delivered, not a journal that no one will read, but a record, a testimony, a bearing of witness to what has happened, to what is happening still. You find paper, pencils, a flat surface cleared of dust, for long enough to cover with words. You begin with the date, as best you can determine it, and then the simple statement: the dust came, and everything changed. The act of writing takes more energy than you anticipated. Your hands, once steady, now tremble with the effort of forming letters, of pressing pencil to paper. Your breath, already labored, grows more ragged as you concentrate on finding words for experiences that exist at the edge of language. Nevertheless, you continue, filling one page and then another, recording the progression of the dust, the failure of systems, the slow surrendering of your body to an element it was never designed to process. As you write, you cough, regularly, painfully, productively. The cloth beside you grows spotted with blood, and with the dark matter your lungs are desperately trying to expel. You pause frequently, waiting for spasms to pass, for breath to return, for strength to flow back into limbs growing weaker by the hour. Night falls, though it's marked only by a subtle deepening of the brown haze outside your window. You light your last candle, its flame flickering in the dust-thick air. By its light, you continue writing, possessed now by a need to complete this record before your strength fails entirely. You write about the sound of the wind, how it changed from an ordinary phenomenon to a malevolent presence, a voice that speaks without words, but communicates hopelessness with every moan and howl. You describe the texture of dust between your teeth, against your skin, in your hair, how it became not just an environmental condition, but almost a part of your body, a modification of your physical self that occurred without consent. You document the progression of dust pneumonia, the slow drowning in soil that your body is experiencing, the dry cough that became wet, the clear phlegm that darkened with particulate, the breathing that grew labored, then painful, then insufficient, the blood that now comes with each coughing fit, evidence of damage beyond your body's ability to repair. As you write, you become aware of a new sound beneath the constant howl of the wind, a faint scratching from within the walls of your home. At first, you attribute it to exhaustion, to the auditory hallucinations that the dust pneumonia pamphlet warned might come with oxygen deprivation. But the sound continues, grows more distinct, more localized. It's coming from inside the wall behind your kitchen stove. You set down your pencil, listening intently. The scratching continues, accompanied now by a soft chittering that is unmistakably animal rather than mineral. Something is alive in your walls, seeking escape or entrance, or perhaps just movement through a space slightly less dust-filled than the world outside. The realization that you are not entirely alone, that some other living creature shares your dust-entombed space, brings an irrational comfort. You move closer to the wall, pressing your ear against it, listening to the small sounds of life continuing, despite the environmental catastrophe that has halted human activity. Hello, you whisper to whatever is moving behind the plaster and wood. I hear you. The scratching pauses, as if your voice has startled its source, then resumes with increased vigor. You imagine a field mouse, or perhaps a rat, driven indoors by the dust that has buried its usual habitat, now making new paths through the infrastructure of human dwellings. In ordinary times, you might have set traps, sought to eliminate a pest that threatens food stores and spreads disease. Now you welcome it as a companion in isolation, as proof that life persists even in conditions hostile to its continuation. You return to your writing, but fatigue overwhelms your determination. The pencil slips from your fingers, leaves a thin gray line across the paper. As your hand relaxes, your eyes close despite efforts to keep them open. The candle burns lower, its light diminishing, as the wick drowns in its own melted wax. Sleep takes you, sitting upright at your kitchen table, head eventually coming to rest on the journal of dust that you've been creating. Your dreams are of clear skies and clean air, of rain that settles the dust and reveals a world still recognizable beneath its brown shroud. You dream of voices other than your own, of hands touching yours without the barrier of dust between skin and skin, of breath that doesn't fight for space alongside soil in your lungs. You wake disoriented, unsure how long you've been asleep. The candle has guttered out, leaving you in darkness, so complete it's disorienting. Your mouth tastes of blood and dust, a metallic earthiness that turns your stomach. Your chest aches with a deep, bone-level pain that suggests damage beyond repair. Rising from the chair requires concentration and effort that leaves you trembling. You move by memory and touch through your darkened home, seeking the window to determine if it's night or day beyond the dust-veiled glass. Your fingers find the sill, then the pane, but can discern only darkness beyond. Either it is night, or the dust has thickened to a point that blocks all light, even the dim illumination that has passed for daylight in recent weeks. You wait by the window, watching for any change in the quality of darkness that might indicate dawn approaching. Time passes, minutes or hours, you can't be sure. Eventually, a faint lightening appears, brown darkness becoming brown twilight once more. Another day in the dust has begun. Your morning routine, has been reduced to its most essential elements: a sip of water to ease the night's thirst, a small portion of food to quiet the gnawing in your stomach, a token effort to clear dust from the surfaces you must touch. Each action requires more energy than it should, leaves you more breathless than can be sustainable. You ration not just your supplies now, but your movements, your exertions, aware that each one draws on reserves of strength that are not being replenished. The coughing grows worse as the day progresses. It comes in waves that leave you gasping, spots dancing in your vision from lack of oxygen. The cloth you hold to your mouth comes away increasingly streaked with red, the dust in your lungs causing damage that manifests as blood. You try not to think about what this means for your remaining time, about how quickly or slowly the dust will complete its work of transforming your body from living organism to inanimate matter. Midday brings a new development. The scratching in the walls has increased, spread to multiple locations throughout your home. It's as if the creature you heard last night has invited others, or perhaps it's the same animal moving frantically from place to place, seeking escape from dust that infiltrates even the spaces between walls. The sound provides a counterpoint to the wind's moan, a reminder that movement continues even as the world seems suspended in brown stasis. You return to your writing, adding pages to the journal of dust. Your handwriting has deteriorated, becoming shaky and uneven, a visual representation of your body's decline. Still you persist, recording the progression of symptoms, the changing landscape outside your window, the sounds of life within your walls. The act of documentation gives purpose to hours that would otherwise stretch formlessly from waking to sleeping. In the afternoon, though time has become more suggestion than certainty, you hear a new sound above the wind's constant pressure. It's mechanical, rhythmic, human-made. You move to the window, straining to see through the brown haze. A shape materializes in the dust-filled street, resolving into the outline of a vehicle moving slowly, its progress impeded by drifts that have turned the road into an alien landscape. Hope surges briefly, painfully. Is this the evacuation that was promised and never arrived? Is salvation finally approaching your dust-entombed home? You watch the vehicle's slow progress, trying to discern its make and purpose. It's not the government truck you were told to expect, but something smaller, a passenger car laboring through soil that reaches halfway up its wheels. The car stops in front of what was once your neighbor's house, now just another dust-shrouded structure indistinguishable from the others on the street. The driver's door opens and a figure emerges, immediately wrapping a scarf around nose and mouth against the swirling dust. The figure, tall, male, dressed for travel rather than resettlement, approaches the house, knocks, receives no answer, moves on. You should call out, signal your presence, but your voice has dwindled to a whisper, your lungs incapable of producing the volume needed to carry through walls and wind and dust. Instead, you move to your front door, each step an effort that leaves you breathless and dizzy. You open it as the figure approaches, letting in a swirl of dust that momentarily blinds you. When your vision clears, you see a man in his 30s, his eyes the only visible feature, above a scarf wrapped multiple times around the lower half of his face. Those eyes widen at the sight of you, or perhaps at what you've become. Weeks of dust and deprivation having transformed you from the person you were into a gaunt grey figure at home in this brown world. "You're alive," he says, his voice muffled by the scarf, but clearly surprised. "I didn't think anyone would still be here." You try to speak, but a coughing fit takes you instead, doubling you over with its force. The man steps back instinctively, then forward again, as concern overcomes caution. He helps you inside, closes the door against the swirling dust, guides you to a chair where you can sit until the spasm passes, when you can breathe again, shallow, painful breaths that fill your lungs with insufficient air. You look up at this unexpected visitor. Who are you? You manage, your voice a rasp that barely carries across the small space between you. In James Miller, he says, unwinding the scarf enough to be better heard. I'm looking for my sister, Mary Thompson. She lived next door. You close your eyes briefly, remembering Mrs. Thompson and her nephew, both gone now, either fled or buried somewhere beneath the dust. She's gone, you say simply, lacking the strength for a more detailed explanation. Everyone's gone, or dead. James Miller absorbs this information, his expression unreadable behind the partial mask of his scarf. And you, he asks, why are you still here? The question is both simple and impossible to answer fully. You gesture vaguely at your body, at the blood-spotted cloth in your hand, at the dust that covers every surface of your home. Too sick to leave, you say. Too late now. He nods, understanding without further explanation. I'm heading west, he says after a moment. You say the dust thins out near the mountains. Not gone, but better, breathable. I could take you. The offer hangs in the air between you, a lifeline thrown when you're already too far underwater to reach it. You consider the state of your body, the progression of the dust pneumonia, the reality of what travel would entail in your condition. I don't think I'd make it, you admit, the words carrying the weight of your mortality. James doesn't argue, doesn't try to convince you otherwise. He sees what you see, a body too far gone, too saturated with dust to survive the journey to clearer air. Instead, he asks, what can I do while I'm here? The question catches you off guard. After weeks of self-reliance, of making do with dwindling resources and failing strength, the offer of help feels almost foreign, a concept from a world that no longer exists. You consider what you need, what would make the time you have left more bearable. Water, you finally say, if you have any to spare. James nods, disappearing back into the dust outside and returning moments later with a gallon jug, its contents sloshing clearly audible. Filled it at the last town with running water, he explains, setting it on your kitchen table, 3 days east of here. The sight of clean water, so much of it, more than you've had in weeks, brings tears to your dust-irritated eyes. Thank you, you whisper, unable to express the magnitude of this gift in your dust-weakened voice. He stays for an hour, perhaps 2, time still fluid and uncertain in your dust-altered perception. He shares news from the outside world, what little there is. The dust storms extend across multiple states. He tells you, the worst environmental disaster in American history. The government is setting up relief efforts, but they're overwhelmed, unable to reach everyone affected. Many have fled west or north, seeking areas less impacted by the dust. Others have stayed, trying to hold onto land and livelihoods despite the environmental catastrophe. As he speaks, you drink small sips of the water he's brought, feeling its clean coolness travel down your dust-coated throat. It's the first water you've tasted in weeks that doesn't carry the gritty flavor of soil, and it seems almost too pure for your body to process, like a memory of a world that exists now only in recollection. James offers food as well. Dried meat, hard cheese, crackers sealed in wax paper, but your appetite has dwindled along with your strength. You accept a small piece of cheese, chewing slowly, the flavor sharp and strange, after weeks of bland, dust-infused sustenance. It's almost too much for your system to handle. A sensory overload that reminds you how far you've drifted from normal human existence. When he prepares to leave, continuing his journey west in search of clearer skies and breathable air, you feel a surprising reluctance to see him go. His presence has been a brief reconnection to the world beyond your dust-entombed home, a reminder that humanity continues even as your individual participation in it winds down. "Is there anyone I should contact for you?" he asks, as he rewraps his scarf against the dust. "And family? Friends?" You consider the question, mentally reviewing the connections that once defined your life. Parents long dead, siblings scattered to cities that may be as dust-covered as your own, friends who evacuated early or succumbed to the same dust pneumonia that's filling your lungs. "No," you finally answer. "There's no one left to tell." He nods, accepting this statement of isolation without judgment. "Is there anything else I can do before I go?" You glance at the journal of dust on your kitchen table, the record you've been keeping of this slow apocalypse. "Take this," you say, gathering the pages with hands that tremble from the effort. "If you make it somewhere safe, so they know what happened here." James accepts the journal, tucking it carefully inside his coat. "I'll make sure it's read," he promises. Your words won't be buried. After he leaves, returning to his dust-covered car and continuing his journey west, the silence in your home seems more complete, more final than before. His visit, brief, unexpected, a last connection to the world beyond your walls, highlights the isolation that has become your reality. You are alone with the dust, with the wind, with the slow filling of your lungs with soil that once lay beneath your feet. That night, sleep comes in fits and starts, interrupted by coughing fits that bring up more blood than phlegm, by the constant moan of the wind, by the scratching of unseen creatures in your walls. You dream of James Miller making it to the mountains, finding air clear enough to breathe deeply, reading your journal of dust, to people who have never known what it's like to taste soil with every inhalation. Morning arrives, the beginning of what you estimate to be the 27th day of dust and darkness. The water James brought sits on your kitchen table, a treasure more valuable than gold in this dust-buried world. You allow yourself a slightly more generous sip than usual, feeling its coolness ease the burning in your throat, thin the mucus in your lungs, enough to cough it up in clots, tinged with blood and black with soil. Your strength is fading more rapidly now, each day bringing a noticeable decline in what your body can accomplish. Walking from bedroom to kitchen leaves you breathless and dizzy. Lifting the water jug requires both hands and concentration. Coughing, the involuntary expulsion your body performs in desperate attempt to clear your lungs, takes energy you can no longer afford to expend, but have no choice but to surrender. The scratching in your walls continues, a constant counterpoint to the wind's moan. You've grown accustomed to it, even comforted by it, evidence that life continues in some form, that the world has not entirely surrendered to the inanimate dominance of dust. You speak occasionally to whatever creatures share your space, simple phrases offered into the empty air of your home, but directed at the unseen presence behind your walls. "Good morning," you say to the scratching. "Another day in the dust." The scratching pauses briefly, as if in acknowledgement, then resumes with what you fancy is increased vigor, a response to your recognition of its existence. It's a small communion, a minimal connection, but in your isolation, it feels significant. You and it, together witnessing the slow burial of the world beneath drifting soil. Midday brings a coughing fit, more severe than any previous. It takes you by surprise, beginning as the usual tickle at the back of your throat, but quickly escalating to racking spasms that double you over, that bring tears to your eyes, that leave you gasping for breath that won't come. The cloth you hold to your mouth grows heavy with what you're expelling, blood and mucus, and the ever-present dust. When the fit finally passes, leaving you weak and shaking, you examine what has come up. Among the blood and phlegm is something darker, more solid. A small mass of compacted soil wet with your body's fluids, but recognizable as the earth itself, expelled from lungs, no longer able to accommodate both air and dust. The sight frightens you in a way that blood alone did not. This is direct evidence of what's happening inside your body, not just irritation or damage, but actual accumulation, the literal burying of your lungs from the inside out. It is a prognosis written in soil and blood, a timeline shorter than you had hoped, but perhaps longer than you deserve. You move to the window, drawn by a need to see the world once more, to connect with something beyond the confines of your dust-filled home. The view outside is unchanged. Brown haze, drifted soil, the vague shapes of neighboring houses half buried in dust. The wind continues its constant manipulation of this new landscape, lifting soil from one place to deposit it in another, a perpetual rearrangement of earth that has lost its proper place beneath human feet. As you watch, a tumbleweed rolls down what was once your street, moving with purpose, despite being dead vegetable matter driven by indifferent wind. It comes to rest against a drift, partially buried immediately. In a day you think it will be completely covered, invisible beneath the ever-growing layer of displaced soil. In a week, even the memory of its passage will be erased, the landscape smoothed by wind and gravity into undifferentiated brown. You turn away from the window, from the evidence of erasure happening outside your walls. Inside, the process is different, but the result the same. Dust-filling spaces meant to be empty, coating surfaces meant to be touched, entering lungs meant to process air. There is no escape from it, no shelter that truly deserves the name. The dust is winning its slow war of attrition, claiming territory, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. The afternoon passes in a fog of increasing weakness. You move between bed and chair, between sitting and lying, seeking a position that might ease the burden on your dust-filled lungs. Nothing helps for long. The coughing continues, productive of blood and soil in nearly equal measure. Your breathing grows more labored, each inhalation a conscious effort that yields diminishing returns. Evening approaches, marked by the subtle darkening of the brown haze outside your window. You light a match, one of the few remaining from a box that once seemed inexhaustible, and touch it to the wick of an improvised lamp, cooking oil in a jar, a strip of cloth serving as wick. It provides minimal light, a small circle of illumination in a home increasingly surrendered to darkness. By this meager light, you write a final entry in a new journal, started after giving your first to James Miller. Your handwriting is barely recognizable, the pencil moving unevenly across paper as your hand trembles with the effort. Still, you persist, recording the progression of your symptoms, the continuing presence of the wind and dust, the scratching in your walls that has become a strange comfort in your isolation. As night falls fully, bringing a darkness only marginally deeper than the day's brown twilight, you prepare for what sleep might come between coughing fits. You drink a carefully measured sip of the clean water James brought, feeling it ease the burning in your throat momentarily. You arrange blankets against the perpetual chill that comes with dust and poor circulation, with a body consuming itself in absence of adequate nourishment. The scratching in your walls has grown more insistent, localized now near the baseboard behind your bed. As you lie waiting for sleep or coughing, whichever comes first, you speak to the unseen presence, your voice a whisper that barely disturbs the dust-laden air. I hear you, you say to the wall, to whatever lives behind it. I'm still here, we're still here, together, in the dust. The scratching pauses, then resumes with what sounds like determined purpose. You imagine tiny claws working at wood and plaster, seeking passage between the space behind your walls and the space you occupy. You should perhaps be concerned about what might emerge: rodent, insect, some creature adapted to living in the interstices of human habitation. Instead, you find yourself hoping it succeeds, that some living thing might share your final hours, might witness your passage from person to dust. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by coughing that grows weaker as your strength fades. Your dreams are of dust, not nightmares of burial or suffocation, but calm acceptances of transformation, of becoming part of the earth that has so insistently become part of you. You dream of roots growing from your fingers, seeking soil that now exists above ground rather than below. You dream of your skin turning to dust, particle by particle joining the great migration of earth from place to proper place. You wake to darkness and to the certainty that something has changed. The wind, your constant companion for weeks, has stopped. The silence is so complete, so unexpected, that for a moment you wonder if you've already died, if this absence of sound is the first experience of whatever comes after life. Then you hear it, the scratching in your wall continuing despite the wind's cessation. Not dead, then, still present in a world, suddenly, blessedly still. You rise carefully, moving with the deliberate slowness that has become necessary as your body fails. At the window you peer out into darkness that seems different, somehow clearer despite being no less complete. You wait, watching, as the darkness gradually gives way to the brown twilight that passes for dawn. The world outside your window has transformed yet again. The dust has settled in the wind's absence, no longer swirling in the air, but lying in drifts that have altered the landscape beyond recognition. What was once your street is now a series of dunes, like a desert transposed onto what was suburban America. The houses opposite yours are visible only as geometric shapes beneath mounds of soil. Their roof lines, the only indication that human structures lie buried. The stillness is both blessing and curse. Without the wind's constant circulation, the air is clearer, still brown, still dust-laden, but less actively hostile to vision and breath. Yet, without the wind's movement, the silence is complete, emphasizing your isolation in a way that the constant background noise had masked. It is the silence of abandonment, of a world emptied of all but dust, and those too weak or too stubborn to flee it. You turn from the window, moving back toward your bed, when you hear a new sound, not the familiar scratching within your walls, but a soft scrabbling at their base. You watch, breath held, despite the pain of denying your dust-filled lungs oxygen, as a section of baseboard moves, shifts, is pushed aside by something below. A small head emerges, pointed, whiskered, ears flattened against its skull, as it squeezes through the narrow opening. A rat, its fur brown, not by nature, but by the dust that clings to every hair. It pauses halfway through the opening, whiskers twitching as it tests the air of your room, evaluates the potential threat of your presence. You remain perfectly still, unwilling to frighten away this visitor, this living thing that has chosen to enter your space rather than remain hidden behind walls. After a moment's consideration, the rat continues its forward movement, revealing a body made thin by the same scarcity that has diminished your own. It sits on its haunches, just inside the room, front paws dangling, eyes bright, alert, unclouded by dust pneumonia, fixed on your face. "Hello," you whisper, keeping your voice soft and low, non-threatening. "Welcome." The rat's whiskers twitch again, its eyes never leaving your face. It makes no move to approach further, but neither does it retreat, maintaining a cautious distance, while clearly aware of your presence. The two of you regard each other across the dust-filled room, human and rodent, both survivors of an environmental catastrophe that has driven away or killed most other living things. After a long moment of mutual assessment, the rat turns, disappearing back through the opening it created. You feel a sharp disappointment, a sense of abandonment, unreasonable given the brevity of your encounter. Then, moments later, the rat returns, and it's not alone. A second rat follows it through the opening, then a third, until 5 of them sit in a rough semicircle near your baseboards, their eyes reflecting the dim light that filters through your dust-covered window. You laugh, the sound triggering a brief coughing fit that brings up blood and soil in equal measure. When you can breathe again, you address your small audience. Audience has of committee meeting, you ask, your voice a rasp, barely recognizable as human speech. The rats watch you, unblinking, their presence both comforting and slightly unsettling. They've come not to comfort you, you know, but because your home offers some advantage over the areas behind your walls, less dust perhaps, or the promise of food in a world where such has become scarce. Still, their company is a gift in your isolation, a reminder that adaptation and survival continue even as individual organisms fail. That day, the 28th or 29th, you're no longer certain, passes in a strange companionship between you and the rats. They explore your room cautiously, whiskers constantly testing the air, eyes returning frequently to your motionless form on the bed. You watch them, fascinated by their movements, their apparent communications with one another, their methodical investigation of your personal space. When hunger drives you to rise, to make your slow way to the kitchen for a small portion of dwindling supplies, the rats retreat to the opening in the baseboard, but don't disappear entirely. They watch from this safe vantage as you prepare a meager meal, the last of your canned beans, carefully rationed, a sip of precious water to wash it down. Your movements are slow, deliberate, conserving energy that your body can no longer easily replenish. Returning to bed, you notice that the rats have grown bolder in your absence. They've ventured further into the room, one even exploring the foot of your bed, its tiny claws catching on the dust-stiffened blanket. You settle carefully, mindful of not making sudden movements that might startle your small companions. "I don't mind sharing," you tell them, your voice a whisper that doesn't provoke coughing. "There's not much left, but you're welcome to it. Better than going to waste." As if understanding your words, though you know it's merely coincidence, one of the rats approaches the small plate where you've left a few beans uneaten. It sniffs cautiously, then begins to eat, its small jaws working quickly to consume what, for it must be a feast in these dust-covered times. You smile, finding unexpected pleasure in this simple act of sharing, of nurturing another living thing when your own life is fading. The rat finishes the beans and looks up at you, whiskers twitching, eyes bright in the dim light. For a moment, there seems to be a connection between you, fellow survivors of the dust, fellow witnesses to the burial of a world beneath displaced soil. The day passes in this strange companionship, you on your bed growing weaker with each hour, the rats growing bolder in their exploration of your space. By evening, they've established territories within your room, one near the window, watching the darkening world outside, two under the bed, occasionally venturing out to investigate sounds or movements, one near the door, as if guarding against intrusion, and one, the first to emerge, and seemingly their leader, alternating between all these positions, checking on its companions. As night falls, bringing darkness deeper than the day's brown twilight, you light your improvised lamp one last time. Its small flame catches the eyes of the rats, turning them to liquid gold in the shadows. You watch them, these unexpected companions in your final hours, and feel a gratitude that seems disproportionate to their incidental presence, but is no less genuine for that. Your breathing has grown more labored through the day, each inhalation a conscious effort that yields diminishing returns. The coughing continues, though weaker now as your strength fails, bringing up less blood and soil with each spasm, not because there's less to expel, but because your body lacks the energy for effective clearance. You taste dust with every breath, feel it lining your throat, filling spaces in your lungs meant for air alone. The rats notice your declining condition, their behavior changing as your breathing becomes more ragged, your movements more limited. They approach closer, whiskers twitching, as they assess your state. The leader, as you've come to think of the first rat to emerge, ventures onto your bed, maintaining a cautious distance, but clearly watching your face, your chest's labored rise and fall. Night deepens. The darkness in your room, broken only by the small flame of your improvised lamp. The rats remain, their eyes reflecting the light, their presence a strange comfort, as your body continues its slow surrender to the dust. You don't speak to them now, lacking the breath for words that they wouldn't understand anyway. Instead, you watch them, these creatures that have adapted to a world turned hostile to life, that have found ways to survive where humans have fled or fallen. As midnight approaches, though time has become a concept more theoretical than practical, your breathing grows more troubled, each inhalation a struggle that produces less and less reward. The dust in your lungs has reached a critical mass, leaving too little space for the oxygen your body requires. Your heartbeat accelerates, trying to compensate for diminishing supply by increasing circulation, a stopgap measure doomed to failure. The leader rat moves closer, now sitting near your shoulder, its bright eyes fixed on your face. It seems to understand what's happening, to recognize the transition from life to non-life that your body is undergoing. The other rats have gathered as well, forming a small circle on and around your bed, witnesses to your final moments in a world buried by dust. Your last thoughts are not of fear or regret, but of strange gratitude for the water James Miller brought, extending your life by precious days, for the rats that emerged from your walls, ensuring you wouldn't die alone, for the dust itself, which after all is only returning to its proper place, reclaiming space borrowed briefly by human endeavor. There is a rightness to it, a completion of a cycle begun when the first plow broke prairie soil, when the first fence post interrupted the natural flow of wind across grassland. Your final breath is shallow, insufficient, more dust than air. Your heart beats once more, twice, then stillens as your lungs can no longer supply what it needs to continue. The transition is gentle, almost imperceptible. One moment you are a person struggling to breathe, dust-filled air. The next you are matter, returning to matter, joining the great cycle of transformation that governs all existence. The rats remain, watching as your body cools, as the essential difference between living and non-living becomes manifest in the stillness of your chest, the fixed gaze of your eyes. They will stay until hunger drives them back to the spaces between walls, leaving your body to the slow processes of dust and time, to the gradual integration with the soil that has already begun claiming you from the inside out. Outside, the wind remains still, the dust temporarily at rest. But this is merely pause, not conclusion. Soon the wind will rise again. The dust will resume its dance through air, meant to be clear, its burial of a world built on the assumption of permanence. The rats will adapt, will survive in the interstices of this new reality. The dust will continue its slow reclamation of space, and you, now part of the cycle rather than observer of it, will participate in ways impossible to imagine while bounded by the limitations of individual consciousness. This is how the world ends, not with apocalyptic suddenness, but with gradual submission, with the slow acknowledgement that what humans build, the earth can reclaim, not with a bang or even a whimper, but with the soft sound of dust settling, of breath becoming soil, of time continuing its measured pace, long after those who sought to measure it have returned to the elements from which they temporarily borrowed organization and awareness. Dust to dust indeed, the third week without power, without rain, without any sign that the world beyond your door still functions, brings a new kind of silence. It's not the absence of sound. The wind still moans constantly. Your cough still punctuates the hours. The rats still scrabble in the walls and occasionally venture into your living space. This silence is different, more profound. It's the silence of abandonment, of a world emptied of human voice and purpose, of networks and systems gone quiet. Your neighbors are gone now. Mr. Thompson succumbed to dust, pneumonia 6 days ago, his wife following shortly after. The young man who came looking for his aunt, James Miller, continued his journey west, seeking some mythical place where the air might be clear enough to breathe without tasting soil. The government trucks that briefly promised evacuation never returned after that initial distribution of supplies that proved insufficient against the magnitude of the disaster. You are alone in a neighborhood of empty houses, each one slowly filling with the same dust that drifts outside, that coats your lungs, that transforms every surface into a uniform brown. The silence of absence surrounds you, wraps around your dust-weakened body like a blanket, both smothering and strangely comforting. The rats are your only companions now, emerging from the walls with increasing boldness as they recognize that you pose no threat, that you're too weak to chase them away, even if you wanted to. They've grown accustomed to your presence, occasionally venturing close enough to sniff at your hand where it rests on the blanket. You've named them, an irrational act given your tenuous hold on existence, but one that provides a small comfort in the crushing isolation. The leader, first to emerge, and largest of the group, you call Virgil, guide through underworlds. The others, Beatrice, Dante, Milton, and Persephone, complete your literary pantheon of dust world companions. Your stockpile of food is nearly exhausted, reduced to a few cans of dubious content, and the last cup of beans that you're rationing grain by grain. Water is more precious still. The gallon James Miller brought now down to less than a quart, that you sip with deliberate care, wetting your cracked lips and dust-coated throat, just enough to prevent total desiccation. You no longer attempt to clean the dust from surfaces. What would be the point? It returns as quickly as you remove it, a relentless opponent that never tires while your strength diminishes by the hour. The light outside your window never changes, a perpetual brown twilight that blurs the distinction between day and night, between hours and minutes, between time as measured by clocks and time is experienced by a body slowly surrendering to dust. Your watch stopped 4 days ago, its mechanism clogged with fine particles that infiltrate even the smallest spaces, that turn precision instruments into useless ornaments. You mark the passage of time now by the changing level of water in your jug, by the increasing labor of each breath, by the diminishing frequency of your trips from bed to chair to window and back again. Your cough has changed in character, no longer the dry hack of early dust exposure, but a wet, gurgling sound that produces bloody phlegm streaked with black soil. Each coughing fit leaves you more exhausted than the last, your body expending precious energy to expel matter that is immediately replaced by your next desperate inhalation of dust-filled air. It is a futile cycle, a war of attrition that your lungs cannot possibly win against the endless supply of soil suspended around you. The window has become your television, your radio, your last connection to a world beyond the confines of your small home. You sit beside it for hours, watching the unchanging landscape of dust and more dust, the occasional tumbleweed rolling past, like a visitor from another time, the shifting dunes that create new topographies with each subtle change in wind direction. There are no human figures moving across this alien terrain, no vehicles traversing what was once a street, no birds flying through air too thick with soil to support their wings. Even the birds have stopped flying. This realization comes to you one morning, or is it afternoon? The light offers no clues as you scan the brown sky for any sign of movement. The sparrows that once nested in the eaves of nearby houses, the crows that used to gather on telephone wires, the occasional hawk that would circle high above, all gone, fled, or dead, or transformed, like everything else in this dust-buried world. The absence of birds seems a more profound indicator of wrongness than any human evacuation. Birds have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, have adapted to climate shifts and habitat changes, have persisted through upheavals that erased entire species. If even they have abandoned this place, what hope can there be for its recovery, for its return to something recognizable as the world that existed before the dust came? As you contemplate this bleak thought, one of the rats, Beatrice, smaller than the others, and distinguished by a lighter patch of fur on her head, though this is increasingly difficult to discern under the ever-present covering of dust, emerges from behind the baseboard. She approaches with the caution her species has evolved over millennia of uneasy coexistence with humans, but with less fear than in earlier days, aware perhaps that you lack the strength or inclination to harm her. No birds, you tell her, your voice a rasp that barely carries across the small space between you. Bad sign. Beatrice pauses, whiskers twitching, as she processes the vibrations of your speech, then continues her approach, drawn perhaps by the scent of the water cup beside you, or simply by curiosity about the large, increasingly immobile creature sharing her dust-filled space. You watch as she investigates the area around your chair, her movements precise and deliberate, every pause marked by the frantic twitching of whiskers, testing the air. Despite the dust that clings to her fur, that must irritate her eyes and lungs, as it does yours, she shows no sign of the respiratory distress that is slowly drowning you in displaced soil. Rats, it seems, are better adapted to this new world than humans, a thought that brings a grim smile to your cracked lips. You'll outlast us all, you murmur to Beatrice, who ignores your words, but responds to the vibration of your voice by glancing briefly in your direction before continuing her methodical exploration. Inheritors of the dust, the day passes in a haze of increasingly labored breathing, of coughing fits that bring up alarming amounts of blood-streaked soil, of periods of lightheadedness, when your oxygen-starved brain begins to fray at the edges of consciousness. The rats come and go, emerging from the walls to investigate your increasingly immobile form, retreating when your coughing sends vibrations through the floor that their sensitive paws interpret as danger. As darkness falls, the brown twilight deepening to a brown night, barely distinguishable except by the absence of what little definition the daylight provides, you make a decision that has been forming in the recesses of your dust-clouded mind for days. You will leave your home, will step outside into the dust-covered world, will see with your own eyes what has become of the street where you've lived, the neighborhood that was once familiar, the sky that should be visible above, but has been obscured for so long by swirling soil. It is not a rational decision. You know your body is too weak for such an expedition, that the exposure to unfiltered dust will accelerate the pneumonia already drowning you from within, that there is nothing to see outside that isn't visible from your window. But rationality has become a luxury that belongs to the world before dust, to a time when actions were measured against futures that might extend for decades rather than days or hours. Now, with your future contracted to a vanishing point visible on the near horizon, different metrics apply. You want simply to see the sky once more before you die, to confirm with your own eyes that it still exists above the dust, that the brown cloud has not become the permanent atmosphere of a transformed planet, to stand beneath whatever stars might be visible through the haze, to feel wind unmediated by walls and windows against your face, to experience directly what you've been witnessing second-hand through glass that grows more opaque with each passing day. Moving from your chair by the window requires concentration and effort that leaves you breathless and dizzy. Your legs, weakened by weeks of minimal use and inadequate nourishment, tremble beneath your reduced weight. You steady yourself against the wall, breathing in shallow gasps that bring more dust than oxygen into failing lungs, waiting for the room to stop its slow revolution around your fragile form. The rats notice your unusual vertical position, emerging from various hiding places to watch with bright, curious eyes. Virgil, the leader, approaches closest, whiskers twitching, as he assesses this new behavior from the large, usually stationary creature whose space he shares. You imagine he's concerned about your well-being, though you know it's more likely he's simply calculating whether your movement represents opportunity or threat to his small community. Going out, you tell him, your voice a thread of sound barely audible above the constant moan of the wind outside. Won't be long. Virgil watches as you make your slow way toward the door, his head tilting as if in confusion or consideration. The other rats hold their positions along the baseboards, ready to retreat at the first sign of danger, but clearly interested in this unprecedented development in their dust-buried world. The door hasn't been opened in days, weeks, perhaps time having become so fluid and unreliable in your dust-altered perception. The knob turns under your hand with reluctance, its mechanism gritty with fine particles that have infiltrated even this sealed entry point. When the latch finally releases, the door itself resists opening, pressure from accumulated dust outside creating a seal that requires more strength than you possess to break. You lean your weight against the wood, pushing with what remains of your once adequate strength. For a moment, nothing happens. The door remains stubbornly closed, the outside world as inaccessible as if it were on another planet. Then, with a sudden yielding that nearly sends you sprawling, the door swings partially open, revealing a gap just wide enough for your dust-thinned body to squeeze through. The air that enters through this opening is not the fresh breeze of memory, but a thick soup of suspended soil, visible even in the dim light, as swirling particles that immediately seek entry to your lungs, your eyes, the fabric of your clothing. You hesitate at the threshold, momentarily reconsidering the wisdom of this expedition. But the desire to see the sky, to confirm the continued existence of a world beyond dust, overcomes rational caution. You step forward, through the narrow opening, into what was once your front yard, but is now an alien landscape of drifted soil and unfamiliar contours. The dust outside is deeper than you anticipated, reaching mid-calf in some places, creating an additional drain on your already minimal reserves of strength. Each step requires deliberate placement, a careful testing of the surface that might conceal debris or drops beneath its uniform brown covering. You move slowly, breathing through the cloth you've wrapped around the lower half of your face, eyes narrowed against the sting of airborne particles. The world beyond your door is transformed beyond recognition. What was once a street lined with modest homes is now a series of mounds and valleys formed by drifted soil. The houses across from yours are visible only as geometric shapes beneath blankets of dust, their roofs and upper windows emerging from brown shrouds, like the faces of drowning victims breaking the surface of a mud-clouded lake. There are no trees visible, no lampposts, no mailboxes, or fire hydrants, or any of the other small markers of civilized space. Only dust, shaped by wind into forms both alien and oddly beautiful in their stark simplicity. You make your way carefully toward what was once the center of the street, each step an effort that leaves you increasingly breathless. The cloth over your mouth and nose quickly becomes heavy with moisture from your exhalations and with dust captured from the air you're struggling to breathe. Your vision blurs, partly from dust, irritating your eyes, and partly from the oxygen deprivation that turns the edges of your visual field dark and indistinct. Despite these challenges, you continue forward, driven by a need to reach a vantage point, clear of buildings and trees, a place where you might look up without obstruction and see whatever remains visible of the sky above the dust cloud. You know rationally that the chances of seeing stars, or moon, or even a patch of clear atmosphere are vanishingly small. The dust has been too thick, too pervasive for too long to allow such visibility. Still you persist, putting one foot before the other in a slow procession toward the center of what was once your neighborhood. As you walk, you notice small details previously invisible from your window. A child's bicycle half buried in drifted soil, its bright red paint faded and obscured by dust, but still recognizable as an artifact from the time before. A mailbox collapsed onto its side, the name Johnson's barely legible on its dust-coated surface. A garden gnome, incongruously cheerful, despite being buried up to its concrete shoulders in displaced earth. These remnants of ordinary life, preserved like fossils in the dust, strike you as more poignant than any grand ruins might be, small evidences of the everyday existence that has been erased by wind and soil and abandonment. You reach what you judge to be the center of the former street, though all landmarks have been obscured or transformed by drifted dust. Here, turning slowly in a full circle, you can see the remains of your neighborhood from a perspective impossible from your window. Houses in various states of burial, some with only roof lines visible, others with second-story windows emerging like eyes from brown faces. No lights, of course. The power has been out for weeks. No movement, save the constant swirl of dust in the air, and the occasional collapse of an overstressed structure, sending up brief plumes of displaced soil. And then, remembering your purpose, you look up. The sky above is not the clear blue of memory, or the star-scattered black of night, but a uniform brown, a thick cloud of suspended soil that obscures any celestial body that might lie beyond. It's as if the earth itself has risen, has claimed the atmosphere as new territory, has erased the boundary between terrestrial and aerial that humans have always taken for granted. There is no break in this brown ceiling, no patch of clearer air that might offer a glimpse of what lies beyond the dust. Standing there, in the center of a street, transformed into an alien landscape, you confront the possibility that perhaps there is nothing beyond the dust anymore, that the world has been so fundamentally altered that concepts like sky and clear air are now historical artifacts, as obsolete and inaccessible as dinosaurs or dodos, that what you're experiencing is not a temporary environmental catastrophe, but a permanent transformation of the planet's atmosphere, a new reality to which humans can either adapt or perish. This thought, more than any physical discomfort, brings you to your knees in the drifted soil. The dust cushions your fall, soft as flour, beneath your dust-thin body. You kneel there, looking up at the featureless brown sky, feeling the wind pluck at your clothing, at the cloth covering your face, at the strands of hair escaped from the scarf wrapped around your head. Dust swirls around you, settling on your shoulders, your eyelashes, your upturned palms, as if the earth is trying to reclaim your body even before you finished using it, is impatient to incorporate your elements back into its vast cycles of matter and energy. A coughing fit overtakes you, violent spasms that double you forward, that bring up blood and soil in equal measure. The cloth over your mouth grows heavy, soaked with evidence of your body's desperate attempt to clear airspace for oxygen that isn't there. When the spasm passes, leaving you weaker than before, you remain bent forward, hands braced against dust that was once roadway, head hanging between shoulders, grown bony from weeks of deprivation. You should return to your home, to the minimal shelter it provides against the pervasive dust. You know this, can feel your body's accelerating decline as exposure to unfiltered air speeds the pneumonia's progression, but the effort of standing, of retracing your steps through deepening soil, of pushing open a door grown heavier in your absence, it seems insurmountable, a mountain beyond the climbing abilities of your dust-weakened limbs. So you remain kneeling in what was once a street, watching as the dim light fades toward what must be evening, though the brown haze makes traditional markers of time like sunrise and sunset impossible to discern. The temperature drops with the light, a cold that seeps through your dust-covered clothing, that reaches bone with surprising speed. You begin to shiver, your body's reflexive attempt to generate heat it can no longer produce in sufficient quantity. Around you the wind continues its constant moan, lifting dust from one place to deposit it in another, an endless rearrangement of soil that belongs beneath feet, rather than suspended in air meant for breathing. The dust settles on your immobile form, a thin layer accumulating on shoulders, on bent head, on the backs of hands, still braced against the ground. You are being buried in slow motion, transformed from living being to geological feature one particle at a time. As darkness deepens, your thoughts turn inward, away from the dust-filled world around you, toward memories of when that same world was green and blue and full of sounds other than wind moaning through empty spaces. You remember summer afternoons, before the drought, before the dust, when the sky was a blue so intense it hurt to look at directly, when grass grew in yards now buried under feet of displaced soil, when birds filled that sky with movement and song. You remember faces, family, friends, neighbors, now gone, either fled to places rumored to have clearer air, or buried in graves increasingly difficult to locate, as dust drifts erase markers and boundaries. These memories bring no pain, no regret, only a gentle recognition of what has been lost, what has been transformed beyond recovery. There is a strange peace in this recognition, a surrender to forces larger and more enduring than any human life or civilization. The dust will continue long after your brief awareness has flickered out, will eventually settle, will become once more the foundation for whatever forms of life can adapt to this transformed world. As the cold deepens, your shivering gradually subsides, not because warmth returns, but because your body is conserving its dwindling energy for essential functions like heartbeat and breath. Your thoughts grow increasingly disconnected, drifting like the dust around you from one fragmented image to another. You see faces, places, scenes from a life that now seems to have happened to someone else, in some other world, impossibly distant from this dust-buried reality. A sound catches your fading attention, not the wind's constant moan, which has become so much a part of the background that you no longer consciously register it, but something different, a scratching, familiar from your home, but unexpected here in the open. You turn your head with effort that leaves you momentarily dizzy, searching for the source of this incongruous sound. There, emerging from what must be a storm drain now almost completely filled with dust, is a rat. Not one of your named companions from home, but a stranger with the same dust-covered fur, the same bright eyes reflecting what little light remains in the deepening darkness. It pauses at the edge of its exit point, whiskers twitching as it assesses the open space, the strange figure kneeling in the dust. You watch without moving, without even the energy to feel surprise at this apparition. The rat watching you seems to reach some conclusion, moving forward with the deliberate caution of its species, testing each step before committing its weight. It approaches to within a few feet of where you kneel, close enough for you to see the rapid rise and fall of its sides as it breathes dust-filled air with apparently less difficulty than you experience. "Hello," you whisper, the word barely audible even to your own ears, muffled by the cloth still covering the lower half of your face. "Far from home, aren't you?" The rat freezes at the vibration of your voice, then relaxes as no threat materializes. It continues its cautious approach, circling to maintain what it judges to be a safe distance, while clearly curious about this unusual object in its territory. You remain motionless, lacking the energy for any movement that might frighten away this unexpected companion in the dust-covered darkness. After a thorough investigation conducted entirely through scent and sound, for rats, like most rodents, have poor vision but exceptional olfactory sensitivity, your visitor seems satisfied that you pose no immediate threat. It sits on its haunches a few feet away, front paws dangling in a posture almost human, in its casual observation. Its bright eyes reflect what little ambient light penetrates the dust and darkness, 2 pinpricks of awareness in a world growing increasingly indistinct as your own consciousness fades. The cold has reached your core now, a bone-deep chill that even your body's shutting down of peripheral circulation cannot mitigate. Your breathing, already labored from dust-filled lungs, grows more irregular, shallow gasps, interrupted by longer pauses, as if your respiratory system is forgetting the rhythm it has maintained without conscious thought since your first moment of independent life. Your heartbeat, once a steady background to existence, now flutters and skips, a failing engine running on fumes. The rat watches these changes with the neutral observation of a species for whom death is neither tragedy nor transcendence, but simply part of the environment as common and unremarkable as dust or darkness. It makes no move to leave, as your breathing grows more labored, as the periods between inhalations grow longer, as your consciousness contracts to a single point of awareness, suspended in the vastness of the dust-buried world. Your last thought, as that point of awareness begins to fade like a star swallowed by the brown cloud that has erased the sky, is not of regret or fear, but of strange communion with the dust itself. You've been breathing it for weeks, incorporating it into the fabric of your body with each inhalation. Now, as your body prepares to return its elements to the greater cycles of matter and energy, the boundary between self and dust dissolves, a distinction revealed as temporary and ultimately illusory. The dust was here before you, will remain after you, will eventually incorporate the carbon and calcium and iron that currently comprise your failing body. There is no separation, only transformation from soil to self and back again, a cycle as old as the planet, as inevitable as the wind that moves the dust from place to place in its endless rearrangement of the world's surface. This understanding, more sensation than coherent thought, brings a peace that encompasses both the dying body, kneeling in displaced soil, and the consciousness gradually detaching from that body's limitations. There is no fear in this dissolution, this return to elemental participation in the physical world, only recognition, acceptance, the surrender of temporary organization, back to the greater patterns from which it momentarily emerged. Your final breath is shallow, insufficient, more a sigh than an active taking in of air. Your lungs, clogged with the soil you've been breathing for weeks, can no longer extract enough oxygen from the dust-filled atmosphere to maintain the electrical activity of your brain, the contractile function of your heart. The mechanisms of awareness begin to shut down, one system at a time, in the orderly disassembly of a complex organism returning to simpler forms. Heart slowing, brain activity diminishing, cellular processes grinding to a halt as oxygen deprivation triggers cascading failure throughout the interconnected systems of your body. The cold that seemed external is now revealed as internal as well. The cooling of tissue no longer warmed by metabolic processes, the gradual equilibration of your body's temperature with the night air around it. The rat watches this transformation with neither understanding nor ignorance, but simple presence, an observer neither emotionally involved nor completely detached. When your body finally slumps forward, face pressing into the dust that has claimed so many victims before you, the rat approaches cautiously, sniffing at this object, now more environment than entity. Finding nothing of immediate use or threat, it continues on its way, disappearing into the darkness of the dust-buried street in search of whatever sustenance this transformed world might still provide. Your body remains, a small elevation in the landscape of drifted soil, already being covered by the constant precipitation of dust from the brown air above. By morning, if such a distinction still holds meaning in this twilight world, only the curve of your bent back will be visible above the dust. By the following day, perhaps nothing at all, just another contour in a landscape where human presence has been erased by the earth's redistribution of its own substance. The dust continues its slow accumulation, the wind its constant rearrangement of displaced soil. The houses remain, gradually disappearing beneath drifts that grow with each passing day. The street vanishes entirely, its course marked only by the relative heights of dust mounds on either side. The world is being rewritten in a new language of earth suspended and deposited, of structures buried and exposed, of organic matter returned to inorganic form. In time, the dust will settle, the wind will find new voices, As the landscape it travels across changes shape, rain will eventually come, binding the loose soil into more stable forms. Seeds, dormant but not dead, will germinate in this new medium, sending roots down and stems up through what was once street and yard and home. Life will continue, adapted to changed circumstances, finding new pathways through an altered world, and beneath it all, becoming part of it all. Your body will complete its transformation from organized complexity back to elemental simplicity, carbon, calcium, iron, and all the other components of a human form, returning to the greater cycles from which they were temporarily borrowed. Not an ending, but a change of state, a transformation from one kind of participation in the physical world to another. The dust remembers, though people forget, incorporated into soil, into root and stem and leaf, into the bodies of creatures that consume those plants, into the atmosphere and oceans and bedrock of a planet in constant flux. The elements that once comprised your conscious form continue their journey through time and space, participating in patterns larger and more enduring than any individual awareness could encompass. This is not comfort for the dying, who cease to need comfort at the moment of transition. It is not consolation for the living, who require stories of continuation to make bearable the knowledge of their own impermanence. It is simply the way of things, the truth beneath all human constructs of meaning and purpose, that matter transforms but never truly disappears, that energy changes form but is neither created nor destroyed, that dust returns to dust in cycles as old as the stars from which all elements heavier than hydrogen originally formed. In the dust-buried street, where your body now lies indistinguishable from the soil covering it, these cycles continue. The wind still moans, the dust still shifts, the rats still search for sustenance in a world transformed beyond recognition. The silence that descended with the dust remains, not an absence of sound, but an absence of human voice, of purpose, of the networks and connections that once defined civilization. It is a silence you no longer need to fix, having become part of it, having surrendered individual awareness to the greater patterns of dust and wind and elemental transformation. The world continues, with or without human witness. The dust remembers, even when people forget. The fourth week arrives without fanfare or distinction, just another gradient shift from brown darkness to brown light, another cycle in the endless accumulation of dust within your home. No longer shelter against the elements. Your house has become a sieve through which the outside world filters grain by grain, molecule by molecule, transforming the space from haven to tomb with meticulous patience. You notice it first along the window frames, thin lines of soil seeping through microscopic gaps, creating delicate patterns like brown frost creeping across glass. By mid-morning, these lines have thickened, become rivulets, carrying the earth's substance from outside to inside with quiet determination. The dust falls with a sound so soft, it's almost subliminal, a gentle pat-pat-pat that forms the percussion section in the wind's constant orchestration. Your home, once a distinct separation from the natural world, has become permeable. Walls designed to keep weather at bay cannot withstand the insistent pressure of displaced soil. Door frames warp as foundation shifts beneath accumulated weight. Window seals, degraded by weeks of abrasion from airborne particles, no longer form barriers against the dust's invasion. The house is breathing, inhaling the earth itself through every crack and crevice, filling from the inside like a lung, drowning in soil. You sit in what was once your living room, Watching this slow ingestion of space, the furniture, sofa, chairs, tables wears mantles of dust, inches thick now, their original forms suggested, rather than defined beneath uniform brown shrouds. The floor has disappeared beneath a layer that prints with your increasingly infrequent footsteps, recording your diminishing movements like an archaeology of surrender. The walls, once distinct planes of color and texture, have faded to a monochromatic backdrop for the dust's patient accumulation. Moving through this transforming space requires deliberate care, each step calculated to disturb as little as possible of the settled material. Not from any hope of maintaining cleanliness. That concept belongs to the world before dust, an artifact of memory like clear skies or running water, but from conservation of increasingly precious energy. Every disturbance of settled dust sends particles airborne again into lungs already compromised beyond recovery, accelerating the pneumonia that fills your chest with soil instead of oxygen. Your breathing has become a conscious effort, each inhalation a deliberate act that yields diminishing returns. The air inside your home, once a refuge from the choking atmosphere outside, is now indistinguishable in its dust content, perhaps worse due to the enclosed space and lack of circulation. You cough constantly, a deep, wet sound that brings up matter more solid than liquid, more earth than bodily fluid. Your handkerchiefs, once white cotton, now uniformly brown, grow heavy with the evidence of your lungs' failing battle against the dust. Water remains your most precious resource and your greatest anxiety. The gallon James Miller brought 3 weeks ago, a lifetime in dust measurement, has dwindled to less than a cup, rationed with increasing severity as your thirst grows more pronounced. You use it primarily to moisten cracked lips and dust-coated throat, allowing yourself one true swallow per day, feeling it travel down your esophagus like a memory of when hydration was taken for granted, when taps produced clear liquid instead of dust-clogged emptiness. Food has become an abstract concept rather than a physical reality. Your supplies exhausted days ago. You subsist now on what your body can extract from its own reserves, which were minimal to begin with, and have grown critically depleted over weeks of dust-imposed fasting. Hunger, once sharp and insistent, has faded to a background emptiness, a hollow space at your core that occasionally reminds you of its presence, but no longer commands urgent attention. The radio, your last tenuous connection to a broader world, sits silent on a dust-buried shelf. Its batteries died a week ago, the final voice fading mid-sentence, leaving you in a silence broken only by wind and coughing, and the soft sound of dust accumulating. You keep it nevertheless, a totem from the time of communication, of voices traveling through air, designed to carry sound rather than soil. Your world has contracted to the few rooms of your home, and even these are shrinking as dust fills corners, narrows doorways, raises floors, inch by inch, toward unchanging ceilings. The physical compression mirrors your mental state. Thoughts grow simpler, more immediate, focused on breath and thirst and the changing topography of your living space. The past recedes, like a dream, half remembered upon waking. The future contracts to hours or days rather than weeks or years. Only the present has substance, and that substance is dust. The morning, if such a distinction still holds meaning in this twilight world, brings a new development. The dust falling inside your home has changed its pattern, its sound, no longer the soft, constant patter of fine particles, but a more substantial fall, almost like very light rain hitting a roof. You look up, tracing this new sound to its source, and see that the ceiling has begun to crack, fine lines spreading like a web across the plaster. From these cracks, dust falls in small streams rather than individual particles, creating cones on the floor below each new opening. The weight of accumulated soil on your roof, you realize, is becoming structurally significant. Designed to withstand snow, rain, the occasional branch or debris, your home never anticipated, bearing the burden of earth measured in tons rather than pounds. Each day of continuing dust storms adds to this weight, bringing the ceiling incrementally closer to collapse. You should leave, find another structure, perhaps one of the abandoned houses nearby that might have fared better against the dust's relentless pressure. You know this. Understand the danger with the clarity that imminent mortality brings to calculation, but the energy required to move, to navigate through dust drifts that have transformed your neighborhood into an alien landscape, to establish even a temporary shelter elsewhere, it's more than your dust-weakened body can provide. So you remain, watching as your home slowly fills with earth, as the space between floor and ceiling diminishes particle by particle, as the distinction between inside and outside blurs toward meaninglessness. There is a strange comfort in this surrender, a release from the exhausting effort of resistance. The dust will have its way regardless of your actions. Accepting this brings a peace absent from earlier days of cleaning surfaces, only to watch them disappear again beneath brown shrouds of ceiling windows that leaked air through dozens of previously invisible cracks. Midday brings another coughing fit, worse than those preceding it. You double over with the force of your body's desperate attempt to clear airspace for oxygen, bringing up material so solid it might be classified as mud rather than phlegm. When the spasm passes, leaving you lightheaded and weaker than before, you examine what has come from your lungs. A mass of soil held together by bodily fluids, a concrete evidence of the earth, literally filling spaces meant for air. The sight should be terrifying, but instead provokes only a distant academic interest, as if you're observing a medical case study rather than your own body's failure. You've moved beyond fear to a place of strange detachment, watching the progression of dust pneumonia with the clinical curiosity of a physician rather than the panic of a patient. Your breath comes in shallow gasps between coughing fits, each one drawing in more dust than oxygen, accelerating the very condition it seeks to alleviate. As afternoon fades toward evening, the transition marked only by subtle shifts in the quality of brown light filtering through dust-covered windows, you make a slow circuit of your home, assessing the dust's accumulation, the changing geography of what was once familiar space. The kitchen has become nearly inaccessible, dust drifted against cabinets to a height that prevents doors from opening. The bathroom is a landscape of small dunes, the bathtub a depression filled with soil as fine as flour. Your bedroom remains navigable only because your continued presence there has disrupted the dust's even distribution, your body creating a negative space in its patient accumulation. Returning to your chair by the window, positioned to catch what little light penetrates the brown haze outside, you notice movement in the dust near the baseboard. A small head emerges, whiskers twitching, bright eyes assessing the space before committing to full entrance. One of the rats, Virgil, you think, though distinction between individuals has grown difficult as dust covers their fur in uniform brown, ventures into the room, followed closely by two others. Their appearance no longer startles or disgusts you. They've become companions in isolation, fellow witnesses to the slow burial of the world beneath displaced soil. You watch as they navigate the dust-transformed landscape of your living room, their paths leaving small trails in the otherwise undisturbed surface. They approach closer than in previous visits, perhaps sensing your weakened state, your diminished capacity to pose threat. "Hello, friends," you whisper, your voice a thread of sound barely audible above the wind's constant moan. "Come to check on me." The rats pause at the vibration of your voice, then continue their approach, driven by curiosity, or perhaps by scarcity of other options in this dust-filled world. The leader Virgil in your private mythology comes closest, pausing just beyond arm's reach, whiskers moving continuously as he processes the complex olfactory information your presence provides. You observe these small survivors with a mixture of envy and admiration. Their bodies, designed by evolution for burrows and crevices, for navigating the margins of human habitation, seem better adapted to this dust-filled environment than your own. Their fur, though coated with the same fine soil that covers everything in this transformed world, still allows flexibility of movement. Their respiratory systems, while surely affected by the pervasive dust, continue functioning adequately enough for exploration and survival. "You'll outlast us all," you tell them, triggering a brief coughing fit that sends them scurrying for safety behind the baseboard. When you can breathe again, shallow, insufficient breaths that bring more dust than oxygen into failing lungs, you notice they've returned, watching from a slightly greater distance, but still present, still curious about the large, increasingly immobile creature sharing their dust-filled territory. Night falls gradually, the brown twilight deepening to a darkness broken only by whatever moonlight can penetrate the dust cloud that has replaced the sky. You light your last candle, not from any real need for illumination, as your activities have contracted to sitting and breathing, neither requiring vision, but for the companionship of its flame, the small reminder of human technology and tradition in a world returning to elemental simplicity. By this meager light, you write what may be your final entry in the journal, started after James Miller took your first record of the dust's progression. Your handwriting, once clear and controlled, has deteriorated to a shaky scrawl barely legible even to your own eyes. Still you persist, recording the changing conditions of your home, the progression of symptoms in your failing body, the presence of the rats who have become your only companions in this slow apocalypse. Writing exhausts what little energy remains after the essential tasks of breathing and minimal movement. You set down the pencil after completing a single page, aware that this may be the last written record of human experience in this dust-transformed world. You don't indulge in grand philosophical statements or emotional farewells. Those belong to a different kind of ending, a different relationship with mortality. Instead, you document the physical reality, the depth of dust on horizontal surfaces, the new cracks in the ceiling, the amount of soil expelled from lungs with each coughing fit. These material details seem more important, more worthy of preservation than any subjective response to the situation. Future readers of this record, if such ever exist, if the dust eventually settles enough for human return to this buried landscape, will draw their own conclusions, will overlay their own emotional interpretations on the bare facts of environmental catastrophe and physical decline. The night passes in fragments of wakefulness, interspersed with periods of unconsciousness, too disturbed by coughing and oxygen deprivation to be truly called sleep. The rats come and go, their movements visible in the darkness as disruptions in the settled dust, small wakes in a brown sea frozen in mid-flow. The wind continues its constant pressure against your home, finding new entries as structural integrity degrades, under the dust's relentless accumulation. Morning arrives, distinguishable from night only by the quality of darkness, brown rather than black, a twilight that will never brighten to full day. You rise from the chair where you've spent the night, each movement requiring conscious thought and effort that leaves you breathless and dizzy. Your destination is the window, a journey of perhaps 6 feet that might as well be miles for the energy it demands from your dust-weakened body. Reaching the glass, you clear a small circle with your sleeve, creating a viewport through accumulated soil. The world outside has transformed yet again, the landscape reshaped by overnight drifting. What was once your front yard is now a series of dunes extending to the street, their crests rippled by wind into patterns reminiscent of ocean waves frozen in brown stasis. The houses opposite yours have disappeared entirely, buried under soil that continues to accumulate with each passing hour. Only their roofs remain visible, dark islands in a brown sea that rises inexorably toward complete submersion. Standing at the window requires more strength than you possess for extended periods. You return to your chair, the short journey leaving you coughing and lightheaded, spots dancing at the edges of vision from oxygen deprivation. The dust pneumonia has progressed beyond the body's ability to compensate, your lungs now more soil than air, your blood carrying insufficient oxygen to maintain normal cellular function throughout your system. Sitting in what may be your final position, body too weak for further travel, even within the confines of your dust-filled home, you notice a new sound beneath the wind's constant moan, beneath the soft patter of dust falling through ceiling cracks, a creaking, subtle but insistent, coming from the roof above your head, the sound of structural elements reaching their limits, of wood and nails and engineering principles never designed to bear the weight of earth measured in feet rather than inches. Your home is approaching collapse, its transformation from shelter to tomb nearing completion. The roof, bearing a burden increased daily by fresh dust carried on relentless wind, is surrendering to gravitational inevitability. Soon, hours or perhaps minutes, it will give way, allowing the accumulated soil above to enter in a rush rather than the gradual filtration that has been filling your space, particle by particle. This knowledge should prompt fear, the instinctive animal panic at imminent physical destruction. Instead, it brings a distant recognition, an intellectual acknowledgement without corresponding emotional response. Your body, already undergoing its own collapse under the dust's relentless invasion, has no energy to spare for fear of what is, after all, merely an acceleration of the inevitable. The dust will have its way, whether through slow accumulation or sudden inundation. The result remains the same. Space that was once defined by human purpose returned to elemental substance, organization surrendering to entropy, complexity reduced to simplicity. The creaking intensifies, joined now by smaller sounds of stress and surrender throughout your home structure. Picture frames fall from walls as their support shifts, landing with soft thuds on dust-covered floors. Shelves tilt, spilling contents into the brown accumulation beneath. The house is coming apart, not with the dramatic suddenness of natural disasters portrayed in films and literature, but with a gradual dissolution, a tired yielding to forces too persistent to resist indefinitely. You sit in your chair, watching this slow disintegration with the detached interest of an observer rather than the panic of a participant. Your breathing, shallow and labored, marks time in irregular intervals. Your heart, struggling to circulate blood increasingly poor in oxygen, beats with the erratic rhythm of a machine operating beyond its design parameters. Your consciousness, deprived of adequate fuel, flickers like a candle in dust-filled air, moments of clarity alternating with periods of confused drifting. The rats sense the imminent structural failure before any visible signs appear to human perception. They emerge from hiding places with unusual urgency, gathering briefly as if in conference, then moving with collective purpose toward the front door. Virgil, the leader in your private mythology, pauses beside your chair, bright eyes meeting yours, in what feels like a moment of interspecies communication. Then he too continues toward the exit, joining his companions in what you recognize as evacuation before disaster. Good luck, you whisper, after these small survivors, your voice a thread of sound lost in the creaking of stressed wood and the constant moan of the wind. May you find better shelter. Alone now, in a house approaching its final transformation, you turn your attention inward to the slow dissolution of your own physical structure. The dust in your lungs has reached critical mass, leaving insufficient space for the oxygen exchange necessary to maintain consciousness and vital functions. Your body, starved of its most essential requirement, is shutting down systems in order of dispensability, peripheral circulation first, then digestive processes, finally the higher cognitive functions that constitute what humans call self or personhood. The creaking above your head reaches crescendo, a sound of wood fibers stretching beyond structural integrity, of nails pulling from supports softened by weeks of exposure to dust and variable temperature. Then, with a noise less dramatic than anticipated, more sigh than crash, a section of ceiling gives way, releasing accumulated soil in a brown waterfall that raises dust clouds dense enough to obscure vision beyond a few feet. You watch this inundation with the calm acceptance that comes not from spiritual preparation, but from physical inability to respond otherwise. Your body, already failing under the dust's internal accumulation, lacks the strength for panic or flight. You remain in your chair as soil pours through the new opening in your ceiling, raising the floor level around you inch by inch, transforming the furniture from distinct objects to mounds beneath a growing layer of earth. The dust falls with surprising gentleness, not the crushing force of avalanche, but the patient accumulation of sand in an hourglass, grain upon grain building toward completion. It reaches your feet first, then calves, then knees, rising around your seated form like brown water filling a basin. Unlike liquid, it retains whatever shape it first assumes, creating a negative space around your body, a mold that records your final position with archaeological precision. As the dust continues falling, now from multiple ceiling breaks as the structural failure spreads throughout your home, you notice a strange phenomenon. The air, typically thick with suspended particles, has cleared somewhat in the area immediately around your chair. The massive movement of soil from roof to floor has created currents that temporarily sweep suspended dust away from your position, allowing you to breathe slightly clearer air than has been available for weeks. This small mercy, almost certainly temporary, a momentary side effect of the very catastrophe that will complete your burial, allows a brief resurgence of mental clarity, of awareness, more acute than the fog of oxygen deprivation has permitted in days. You use this unexpected lucidity to observe the transformation happening around you, to witness the final dissolution of boundaries between inside and outside, between human space and elemental substance. The dust continues its patient accumulation, reaching mid-thigh now, surrounding your seated form with a precision no sculptor could match. The weight of it presses against your legs, your hips, a sensation both restrictive and oddly comforting, like being tucked into bed by impersonal yet gentle hands. You remain conscious, breathing the temporarily cleared air in shallow gasps, that bring only minimal discomfort compared to the scraping inadequacy of previous inhalations. Around you, your home continues its structural surrender. Walls bow inward under the pressure of dust accumulated against exterior surfaces. Window frames distort, glass cracking, but held in place by the very soil putting pressure against it. The front door, blocked for days by drifted dust outside, now faces equal pressure from soil accumulating inside, as ceiling continues to give way in sections large and small. The house that has been filling with earth for weeks is completing its transformation from human shelter to geological feature. The distinction between building and landscape, between constructed environment and natural formation, blurs toward meaninglessness as dust erases the sharp edges and defined spaces of architecture. What emerges is neither fully house nor fully earthwork, but a hybrid form, a recording in soil of human design, overwhelmed by elemental process. The dust reaches your waist now, then your lower chest, rising with the inexorable patience of tide. Your arms rest on its surface, hands half buried in fine soil that feels almost liquid in its ability to conform to the shape of whatever it touches. Your breathing remains shallow but less labored than before, the temporary clearing of air, allowing oxygen to reach lungs already compromised beyond recovery, but still functional enough to maintain minimal consciousness. In this strange clarity, before final dissolution, your thoughts turn to the cyclical nature of the catastrophe engulfing you. The dust now filling your home, your lungs, the landscape for hundreds of miles in every direction. It didn't materialize from nowhere. Its soil, that once lay beneath prairie grasses, anchored by complex root systems, evolved over millennia to hold earth in place against wind and rain. That prairie, plowed under for agriculture, exposed to drought and over-farming, lost its anchoring vegetation, and with it the stability that kept soil in place. Now that soil is returning, not to its original location, but carried by wind to new resting places, roofs that become ground level, roads buried beneath new topography, lungs filled with earth that should have remained beneath feet. There's a symmetry to this redistribution, a balance being restored by forces more powerful and patient than human intention or design. You've become part of this cycle now, not just as observer or victim, but as participant. The dust filling your lungs, mixing with bodily fluids, to create a medium, unlike either soil or tissue alone. It's an integration of human and earthly substance that erases the boundary between organism and environment. You are becoming dust, even as dust becomes you, a transformation more profound than metaphorical, a literal returning of borrowed elements to the greater cycles of matter. The dust continues rising around you, reaching chest level now, the weight of it making each breath more shallow than the last. The temporary clearing of air is dissipating as new soil continues to pour through expanded ceiling breaks, the currents created by initial collapse settling into more uniform distribution. Your vision begins to blur, partly from dust irritation, but primarily from the brain's response to decreasing oxygen supply, prioritizing essential functions, sacrificing peripheral awareness. Around you, the house that has been your shelter and is becoming your tomb continues its structural surrender. The sound of wood cracking, of nails pulling from joists, provides percussion to the wind's constant threnody. The dust rises incrementally, now reaching your shoulders, conforming to the shape of your body with geological patience. Your arms are fully submerged now, only hands visible on the surface of the brown sea rising around your seated form. Your breathing, already shallow and irregular, grows more labored as the dust restricts chest expansion, as the temporarily cleared air fills once more with suspended particles. Your consciousness flickers like a candle flame in variable wind, moments of clarity alternating with periods of absence from which you return, with no memory of where awareness traveled while away from bodily sensation. The dust reaches your chin, your nose submerged with each exhalation, clearing briefly with the minor current created by expelled air. Your head remains above the rising soil, a small island in a brown sea that expands with each section of ceiling collapsing under the weight of accumulated earth. Above, your vision constricts to a tunnel of clarity surrounded by darkening periphery. Your hearing reduces to the sound of blood rushing in your ears and the distant moan of wind outside your filling home. Time loses meaning, stretches and contracts, like taffy pulled beyond recognition of original form. What might be minutes feel like hours. What could be hours compressed to moments between increasingly infrequent and inadequate breaths. Your consciousness, deprived of adequate oxygen and burdened by the weight of soil pressing against your chest, begins the process of final dissolution, not the dramatic moment of cessation portrayed in fiction, but a gradual fading, a transition from being to non-being, as gentle and inexorable as the rising of the dust around your failing body. Your final thoughts are not of regret or fear, but of strange integration, of becoming part of processes larger and more enduring than individual awareness. The dust filling your home, pressing against your chest, entering your lungs with each labored breath. It's the same substance that was once prairie soil, that will eventually settle, that may someday support new growth if rain returns and conditions allow. You are being incorporated into this cycle, not as disruption or tragedy, but as participant, your elements returning to the greater patterns from which they temporarily borrowed organization and consciousness. The dust reaches your lips, then your nostrils, leaving only eyes and forehead above its patient accumulation. Your final breath is shallow, insufficient, more soil than air, entering lungs already compromised beyond recovery. Your heart beats once more, twice, then slows as oxygen deprivation triggers cascading system failure throughout your body. Your consciousness, that strange emergent property of complex biological organization, flickers one last time, like a candle flame, in final consumption of available fuel, then dissipates into the greater cycles of energy and matter from which it temporarily arose. The house continues filling with earth, the distinction between interior and exterior, between shelter and landscape, erased by dust that recognizes no human boundary as permanent. Your body remains in its seated position, preserved in the dry soil that continues accumulating around and above it, a fossil in formation recording this moment of transformation from one state of being to another. Outside, the wind continues its constant moan, carrying dust from one place to another in endless redistribution. The landscape, already transformed beyond recognition, continues its evolution into new forms shaped by elemental forces rather than human design. The dust falls, settles, rises again with the next gust, a dance of particles that has continued since the first winds blew across naked earth and will persist long after human presence has passed from living reality to archaeological evidence. In time, weeks or months or years, measurement meaningless to natural process, the dust will settle more permanently. Rain will eventually return, binding loose soil into more stable formation. Seeds, dormant but not dead, will germinate in this new medium, sending roots down and stems up through what was once house and street and human habitat. The landscape will establish new equilibrium, neither fully natural nor fully artificial, but a hybrid terrain recording, in its very substance, the interaction between human activity and environmental response. And beneath it all, becoming part of it all, your body will complete its transformation from organized complexity to elemental simplicity, carbon, calcium, iron, and all the other components returning to the greater cycles from which they were temporarily borrowed. Not an ending, but a change of state, a transformation from one kind of participation in the physical world to another. The dust remembers, though people forget. It holds within its substance the record of human endeavor and natural response, of prairie plowed and soil displaced, of lungs filled with earth meant to lie beneath feet. It carries this record in its very composition, in the mixtures of elements specific to particular landscapes, in the organic materials incorporated from all that lived and died within its embrace. This is what dust remembers: the shape of your body as soil flowed around it, the chemicals released as consciousness faded, the slow integration of organic material back into mineral substrate. The record of your passage remains in the soil that buried you, in the atoms that once formed your awareness, now dispersed through earth and air, and whatever grows from the dust after it settles. Not comfort for the dying, who cease to need comfort at the moment of transition. Not consolation for the living, who require stories of continuation to make bearable their own impermanence. Simply the way of things, the truth beneath all human constructs of meaning and purpose, that matter transforms but never truly disappears. Today's energy changes form, but is neither created nor destroyed. That dust returns to dust in cycles as old as the stars from which all elements, heavier than hydrogen, originally formed. The house that filled with earth stands no longer as distinct structure, but as subtle elevation in a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The body that once contained consciousness has become indistinguishable from the soil surrounding it, organic material mixing with mineral in processes of decomposition and transformation. The boundary between self and world, always more permeable than human perception acknowledges, has dissolved completely, revealing the temporary nature of separation, the inevitable return of all organized complexity to simpler forms. This is what the dust knows, what it remembers when people forget that all distinctions are temporary, that all borders are provisional, that what appears solid and permanent is merely passing arrangement in the long flow of matter through time. The dust will remain when memory fails, when records disappear, when the very concept of human is transformed beyond current recognition. It will hold within its substance the evidence of all that has been and become, a testament more enduring than any monument carved from stone or cast in metal. In the silence after human voice has faded, in the stillness after wind has quieted, in the darkness beneath earth accumulated grain by grain, the dust continues its patient recording of existence, not through consciousness or intention, but through the simple persistence of matter, the continuing cycles of transformation that constitute the world's true history. The house that fills with earth becomes part of earth itself, its boundaries erased, its purpose transformed. The human body buried within it becomes soil once more, its elements dispersed through natural processes into new forms and combinations. The dust remembers, holding in its substance the record of what was and what became, a testimony written not in words, but in the very composition of matter itself. This is not an ending. It is merely change, transformation, the continuation of processes that began before human awareness emerged and will persist long after individual consciousness has dispersed. The dust falls, settles, rises again with wind, falls once more. The cycle continues, indifferent to human measurement or meaning, persistent in its elemental simplicity, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply present, the foundation upon which all else temporarily rests, before returning to the greater patterns of matter and energy that constitute the world's true substance. The dust remembers, even when people forget, and in that remembering, that holding of all that has been and become, lies the only immortality available to creatures composed of matter, not the persistence of individual awareness, but the continuing participation in cycles larger and more enduring than any single moment of organized complexity. This is what the dust knows, what it will continue to know long after the last human voice has faded into silence, that all returns to earth, that all transforms, that what appears as ending is merely change of state. The house that fills with earth, the body that returns to soil, the consciousness that disperses into the greater cycles of existence, all continue in forms transformed beyond recognition but undiminished in their essential participation in the world's substance, dust to dust, earth to earth, element to element, not tragedy but completion, not ending but transformation, not loss but return. This is what the house that fills with earth knows, what the dust remembers when all else is forgotten.